بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Let's get started inshallah. We're looking at zakah. We're looking at it in some detail inshallah. Some of the discussions surrounding zakah, and hopefully we'll be taking any questions. We'll probably, do we have a way to take questions from the sisters as well, or?
We can get them. Sure.
Yeah, so if you do have any questions, just note them down so you don't forget them, and then we can always share them as we're going through it inshallah. Or I'll ask at certain sections if there's any questions. If there's, for example, if there's somebody here whose wife is present or something like that, you can just ask them to take all the questions from the sisters and just share it with the individual, and then I can just, respond to them inshallah. So, when we're discussing zakah, often there's this discussion in terms of what's the objectives of zakah, what does zakah even mean. Zakah, yazku, comes in the Quran, it comes in different places. Allah talks about the word zakah in different contexts, even in the Quran. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Allah uses it in one context about purifying yourself. So zakah is actually when a person is purifying their wealth. That's one objective. Another definition of zakah is an-numu, that which multiplies, and Allah is actually multiplying and magnifying this wealth. Now yes, it seems illogical and irrational. I am spending my money, how is it being magnified or increased? First of all, understand that there is the currency of this world and the currency of the next world. Right? Look, as believers, our mindset is in the next life, not in this life. And really we have to remind ourselves of this. Wallahi, the more we kind of engage in the world around us, the more we forget this. But the truth is, and sometimes we feel it more and sometimes we feel it less, we all have to go into the grave. And every single one of us, when we go into the grave, nothing counts at that point except what I sent forth. So yes, I have this problem, this concern, this business, this matter to worry about right now. I have loads of things to worry about in my life right now. But the reality is, when I go into the grave, only one thing matters: what have I sent forth? And so true magnification of my wealth and true investment of my wealth is what I send forth into the next life. That's very, very important to understand. And so zakah is magnification. Allah will magnify it and give us blessings in this world, but Allah will also magnify it in the next life. Of course, Allah will give. If you give £1 in charity, you don't get £1 in the hereafter. And I always say this, and I'm going to mention this again, that remember, currency of this world is different to the currency of the next world. And listen to this carefully. If I perform one salah in this world, it's not one reward in the next life. If I say one subhanallah, that's not one reward in the next life. That's not how it works. In the next life, one subhanallah, let me give you an example of what that's worth. One subhanallah is worth more than this entire world and what it contains. Understand that. So if you were to give me one subhanallah, the only valid transaction I can do is give you this entire universe, and even that's not enough. Why? Because this universe will be destroyed one day, having no value, no worth to Allah. Allah talks about in the Quran, and Allah talks about this, the Prophet ﷺ mentions this in narrations. This world has little value to Allah, zero value to Allah, not even that of a mosquito wing. So when we understand that my subhanallah is worth this entire universe, that means the currency of the next life, it's crazy. 10 subhanallahs, it's more than 10 of this universe. That's just the subhanallah. Even your alif lam mim that you recite, that alif gives you 10 rewards. Those 10 rewards, that one letter of Quran that you recite is more valuable than this entire universe. So when you have that in context and you have that in your mind and we have that in front of us, when it comes to giving zakah, this is me investing. So we're looking for the best investment. This is investment. But this is the expectation from Allah. This is the bare minimum that Allah wants from us. And so when we're looking at zakah, there are verses of the Quran that indicate towards zakah that the giving of zakah is compulsory. And the Quran, when it comes with zakah, it comes with salah. 23 times in the Quran, they come literally next to each other. And so when Allah talks about salah, He talks about zakah. When He talks about salah, He talks about zakah. This isn't something optional. This isn't something, Allah will forgive, or I don't know how to do it. It's too difficult. I give some charity anyway, inshallah, that covers it. There's no excuse for us. There's no excuse for us. If you don't know how to calculate it, you're in this session. And we had something on Friday. We have something now. There's scholars present here. You can ask the scholars. You can access anybody and ask, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure. There's something complex here. I get all sorts of questions. I've got people who are asking me, for example, they sell, expensive shoes. Like they have like 2,000 shoes in their stocks. And I'm talking not just the normal ones that you get on the market. They keep them in reserves, and then when the price is prices kind of go up, they then sell these kind of, so they're asking, how do I calculate the value of this stock? Because the market value is differing and all of these kind of things. So there's not a single question that you can have regarding your zakah and your finances which somebody doesn't know the answer to. You've got to ask it. I might not know it right now, I'll go and find out for you. Sheikh might not know it right now because it's a news, something news come up, and then he'll say, you know what, let me go find out, let me go check for you, and then he'll check for you. And so there's no excuse in terms of these kind of things when it comes to lack of education. Now, I would advise making notes. I always advise making notes. You know, it's probably not the coolest thing to do, but I'm telling you, it comes in use. You will use it. You can teach your children through these notes. We need to get into this mentality as well. I'm going to teach my children. I want to teach my children about salah and zakah and hajj and all of these kind of things. So that responsibility, if you want to take that, I'd be making notes on my mobile. I'd be making notes. And so, you know, otherwise it just becomes entertainment, isn't it? It's just another Netflix show that we're just watching and kind of, oh, it sounds cool, it sounds really exciting, or that makes sense. So if you can make notes inshallah. If you have a solid memory, no problem, you don't need to make notes. So when it comes to coming on to the discussions of zakah, we always start with the poverty line. I discussed this in the Jum'ah lecture, the poverty line. All the schools of Islamic law, and I'll be touching on it from the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali schools of law, so all four schools of thought inshallah. The Islamic kind of welfare system operates that we don't want anybody to fall below the poverty line. And so this poverty line is extremely fundamental. Every community, every society has a poverty line. If you are earning less than this, you are below the poverty line. If you are earning more than this or equal to this, you are just above the poverty line, etc. And so within the scholars, there are two opinions. The Hanafi school considers the nisab, which is the rate which I talked about, the gold and silver rate, as the poverty line. So the Hanafi school says, if you fall below that, you are at the poverty line. So if you fall below that line, you are classed as the poverty line. And the other schools, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school, they consider not the nisab, they use kifaya. What does this mean? If you have sufficient wealth to survive, then you are classed as not poor. And if you have below that sufficient wealth to survive, then you are classed as poor. So they are actually a little more kind of, you know, it's a little more, what's the word, not strict, but stringent in that regard. So the Hanafi school, in terms of recipient of zakah, now think about this, can I receive zakah or not? The Hanafi school will say, what's the poverty line? What's the nisab? So you'll calculate the nisab, whether it's the gold nisab, which is 5.6k, or it's the silver, it's 4.5k, or it's the silver nisab, which is 374 pounds. I'll give you these numbers, don't worry. So whether it's the gold nisab or the silver nisab, which we're taking, I take the gold nisab. So if you have less than 4,500, and what do they mean by this? Other than your absolute necessities, for example, your you know, the house that you're living in, maybe a sofa, maybe this, a few necessities, etc., that you need for living. Anything other than that, anything bonus, anything extra, if you add that up and that comes to less than the nisab, you can receive zakah. So that's where this poverty line comes in, and we'll look more about recipients of zakah later. But I want us to understand this nisab idea is very, very important, because somebody above it is giving zakah, but somebody below it can't take zakah just like that. They have to calculate all of their unnecessary assets first, the things that are bonus. For example, if you have 3 fans in the house, as an example, 2 of them you could define as just bonus, extras. 1 of them you could argue to be a necessity, right? So these kind of things. If you have, that's an idea to understand. If you have, for example, a laptop which you use for work, that's necessary. But if you have 2, 3 other laptops lying around in the house, those are above the necessity. If you have a mobile phone, so I have a personal mobile phone, yes, so completely that's fine. I also have a business mobile phone, so a phone that I use in terms of taking questions and things like that. So that's necessity as well. So 2 mobile phones doesn't mean that you've got lots. No, that might be because of necessity. You know, so if you might have 2 mobile phones, 1 for personal use, 1 for business, or 1 for work-related use, and so that you keep that separate, no problem. Do you understand? So when it comes to the poverty line, this is something that scholars discuss, and it comes up again and again. And from the legal kind of philosophy of zakah, zakah is not about making long-term impact. Listen to this carefully. It sounds strange. Zakah is not about long-term impact. Your sadaqah, your normal charity that you give on a day-to-day basis, that's for long-term impact. Zakah is for those people who are below the poverty line and they need the basics. They need the basics. We're not using zakah to say, here I'm going to gift you 10,000 pounds of zakah, you can start up your own business. That's what sadaqah, my normal charity, I use for that. Zakah is to get people off the ground. That's the bare. Somebody doesn't have food, somebody doesn't have shelter, somebody's struggling here, somebody's struggling here. That's what zakah is about. That's the objective of zakah. By the way, giving zakah, from our perspective, never in the Sharia will you find at zakah you look for the most impactful place. Why? I'll give you a very simple example of this. There are narrations that mention giving zakah to certain family members is more rewarding. Why? Because you're giving zakah, and you can't give it to all family members. There are very specific family members you can give it to, but giving it to your family members is double the reward. One is fulfilling the obligation, and second one is keeping ties with relations. Obviously, it's those family members who can receive it, and of course, a husband can't give to the wife, a wife can't give to the husband, etc. A father can't give to the children, so you can't go up to down, but you can go left to right. So a brother can give to another brother, or a sister can give to another brother, or a brother can give to a sister, etc. Zakah should be given like this as well. And remember, the objective of zakah is you're taking care of the people around you first and foremost. So we're going to look at all of the recipients of zakah, that yes, you can give it online, and yes, you can give it there as well. But the objective of zakah really is those people around you. Maybe there's a family member you know is in debt, and that would make them zakah eligible, so you can give them zakah to help them get out of this debt. Even if they're living a 5-star life, what we define as a 5-star life, you can give zakah to somebody who's in debt as well. So really the objective of zakah, the primary objective of zakah, is to get people, it's like a safety net. Those people who are falling and they are really struggling, it's for them to bring them back up. Whereas the sadaqah that we give, the normal charity, every believer, by the way, 2.5% of your wealth that's left over is zakah. But I always say to my students especially, that a certain percentage of your normal wealth, you should be giving to sadaqah. Maybe it's 1%, this is not obligated from the Sharia, this is a personal thing. But 1% of my earnings, whatever I earn, I will give towards sadaqah, certain charitable causes. I'll maybe let it build up and I'll give it. Maybe 0.5%, whatever it is. And if I can't do these kind of percentages, then maybe I'll give every single Friday £1. Why Friday? It's just an easy day to remember I'm coming for Jum'ah, there's boxes on this and that going around, I can maybe donate something. That's why. It doesn't have to be Friday, it can be Monday, it can be Tuesday, it can be Saturday, but something which gets you into a routine. So zakah, the objective is not to kind of create this, empowering people and all that. Yes, it sounds really good and it looks really good, but the bare basics of zakah, the objective is that a person is being brought up off their feet. That's the objective of zakah. That person who's struggling and really struggling, it makes it easier for them. Now, the command to pay zakah, of course, we've talked about. Zakah itself, the verses of zakah were revealed in Makkah Mukarramah. In Makkah, right? So the command of zakah was revealed in Makkah Mukarramah, as we know the verses, etc. But the details and the specific of zakah was only revealed after Hijrah, which is in Medina Munawwarah. Very simple. Look, the Prophet ﷺ becomes a prophet at the age of 40. Age of 40, he becomes a prophet. He's in Makkah for 10 years. After those 10 years, he then makes migration, hijrah, to Medina Munawwarah. When he goes to Medina Munawwarah, he's there for 23 years and he passes away. Now yes, in between there was travels, he was coming back and forth, etc. But generally speaking, there's the Meccan life, 10 years after, from the age of 40 to 50, and then there is the remaining years, sorry, did I say 23? 13 years in Medina Munawwarah, my mistake. So 13 years in Medina Munawwarah. What I meant to say was 23 years was the period of prophethood. So he was born, age of 40. 23 years he's a prophet till the age of 63. The first 10 years he's in Mecca, the next 13 years he's in Medina Munawwarah. Okay, in Mecca Mukarramah, the rulings of zakah was given. In Medina, the command of zakah was given. In Medina Munawwarah, 2 years after the migration, the specifics of zakah was given. So that means that from the time in Mecca to Medina, what were they giving? How were they giving it? They were just giving their normal charity. They were giving normal sadaqah, charitable payments, whatever you can give. But then in the second year of Hijrah in Medina Munawwarah, the specifics were revealed. That this is how you're going to calculate zakah, this is how much you're going to give, this is what you're not going to give, this is what you're going to class as your assets, not your assets. And the ahadith are very clear. If we go through the ahadith, the Prophet ﷺ will mention a person who has 40 camels needs to give this, a person person who has 50 camels needs to give this. A person who has 60 camels needs to give this. And the scholars will then extrapolate the value of 40 camels, and they'll say, okay, if 40 camels value is this much and 1 camel's value is this much, then in proportion you can do this with other kind of livestock. The Prophet also mentions when it comes to gold, if you have this many dinar, you need to give this much dinar. If you have this many dirhams, you need to give this many dirhams. So gold and silver, it's very specific. So that way the scholars will then come and look at the gold and silver and say, okay, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned regarding this many dinar. How much was that dinar weight? Because it was all to do with weight. 200 dinars are a certain weight. So the gold was 87.48 grams and the silver was 612.36 grams. And so the scholars will now say, okay, let's take that weight of gold, and every single generation we can say, wherever we are living in the world, we can say, what's the value of this gold? What's the value of this silver? Now again, these are numbers I'm throwing at you. I will give you those numbers when we get into that. I'm just mentioning kind of the specifics to give you an idea. There is a whole basis in the Quran and the Ahadith which is mentioning these principles. I could go through those narrations and things. It will get very laborious and detailed, but by all means you can ask me afterwards and I can share that with you, specifics of the questions you have. But I'll be presenting it from these kind of Ahadith, etc., and looking at it like that. So 18 months it took when zakah actually became institutionalized, from Makkah Mukarramah to Medina Munawwara, when the first command came to the specific, like to the institutionalization of zakah, where the Prophet ﷺ in the Medinan period, he had zakah collectors, zakah distributors, he had a whole infrastructure set into place, right? So the ruling of zakah it's very simple. It's a fundamental of this faith. The Prophet ﷺ mentions in so many hadith, you'll find in Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah, all of the major books of hadith, they mention that, when they talk about Iman Billah, what are the pillars of faith? Mal Islam, what is Islam? They say that zakah, that you give zakah, that giving zakah is a part of the fundamentals of faith. Rejecting the giving of zakah takes a person out of the fold of Islam. Why? It's not that we get excited saying this person is not a Muslim. It's as simple as this. Rejecting a fundamental of faith, rejecting a verse of the Quran is rejecting in essence Allah. Rejecting the message is rejecting the messenger, which is the Prophet ﷺ, and the person who's sending the message, which is Allah himself. So the institution of zakah is of course very clear, and there's no disagreements in that regard. When you're looking now at zakah and who needs to give zakah, you're going to have two categories. You're going to have the conditions relating to the zakah payer, so me and you, the person, and zakah conditions relating to the wealth. So we're going to look at the conditions of the person who needs to give zakah, and then we're going to look at the conditions of the wealth that needs to be given zakah. And now those who are here in Jum'ah, you got the quick short version of this. It'll pretty much be somewhat of an overlap, but it's a good review for you guys, inshallah. So in essence, there are three main discussions that come into this when it comes to who needs to give zakah. And I touched on this in Jum'ah, but I will also go into this for everybody here. Islam, that's the first thing. Is this person a Muslim? Zakah is not obligated on non-Muslims. We don't go to non-Muslims and say, give me your zakah, I need your zakah, etc. No, it's Muslims who are going to be giving zakah. And so that's, everybody agrees with that. A person who has faith in Allah and a person who has belief in the Prophet ﷺ, this person who's a believer, they believe in the day of judgment, they believe in Yawm al-Akhir, etc. This is the person giving zakah. So there's no disagreement on scholars on this. Number two, there's a discussion regarding children. Do children need to give zakah or not? There is a split within the schools of thought. The Hanafi school says, no, a child doesn't need to give zakah. So the Hanafi school says a child does not need to give zakah. It doesn't matter if he has £1 million. Let's say his father's really rich and he's put £1 million into his account and said, when you grow up, you're going to have this much money and I've invested this for you and this and that. It doesn't matter. The child does not need to give zakah according to the Hanafi school. As soon as you reach the age of maturity, a minor doesn't need to give zakah. As soon as you're hitting the age of 14, etc. like that, or you've had your wet dream and you've reached the age of maturity, this child is now going to have to give zakah. So what we understand from this, very important for parents to appreciate this, your children should know the rules of zakah by the time they're getting mature. That's something we should be educating. That's why I'm saying, make your notes so you can have these conversations with your children. You can say, okay, maybe I won't teach you the complexities of, knowing kind of investments and this and property and this and that, but you've got cash, so you need to know the rulings on the zakah of cash. The child needs to know, okay, this is the website, I'll check for the nisab. I can check the nisab on this website, and I'll give you a website, inshallah, which you can check the daily nisab every single day as it fluctuates. So the child can just check, okay, I've got nisab, and the child has their zakah anniversary, it's written written on the board or something like that at home, on a calendar, that I need to calculate my zakah. And all you'll say to the child is, you calculate your own zakah and then bring your working out to me. And I'll just take a look and say, yeah, you've done it right, fantastic, off you go. Give your zakah. Where are you going to give it? The child will say, I want to give it to these places. Can you imagine how this child is thinking about the situation of the ummah? He's looking at what situation this ummah is going through. They're actively involved. It's not, it's not when we think about it as something I just need to do, it's a fard, I just need to discharge, I just need to, so you know what, here, pass me your stuff, let me quickly calculate it for you. Okay, I'm going to give you zakah here. No, let the child be an adult. They're not children at that point. The Sharia is saying that these laws are a responsibility on this child. Meaning, if the parent doesn't fulfill the zakah on this child, the parent may be responsible and sinful for not teaching them, but the child themselves will be sinful for not obligating and fulfilling the obligation of zakah. So you should be actively wanting your children to seek out avenues of how to calculate and how to give their zakah. As they get stocks, as they get investments, as they get things, they can learn more about the details and the complexities, but the basics, especially for young women, girls, etc., they might have some jewelry or this or that, some money, so teaching them some of those rulings. And for the men, etc., generally they just have cash, but as they grow up, they'll be probably interested in investments, cryptocurrencies and all of these things. So a child doesn't have to give it according to the Hanafi school. According to the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school, meaning the other three schools, a child does need to give zakah. Now the child himself or herself is not responsible and held accountable in the court of Allah. It is the guardian who is held accountable according to the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school. So if a child has lots of money and it's above the nisab, and we'll look at the nisab, the specific figure that they need to have, if they have that amount of money, the parent needs to give the zakah on behalf of the child. That's the responsibility, and the wizr, the sin will be on the parent. Does that make sense? That's from the Hanbali, Shafi'i, Maliki. Hanafi school is simple. Hanafi school says no, children do not need to give zakah. And there's discussions amongst this. The Hanafi school generally say, just as salah is not a responsibility on the child is not held accountable for the salah, they won't be held accountable for the zakah. The other schools say, well, if a child, so we agree with you. The other Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school say, we agree with you. The child doesn't need to perform salah. But if the child was to break something in the masjid, they would be held liable for the compensation of it. If they were to break a chair in the masjid, they would be held liable for that payment. And who has to pay for that? The child has to pay for that. And the parent or the guardian will be responsible of taking it from the wealth of the child. If the child doesn't have money, then the person will wait till the child has money, and then they can request that compensation, etc. So when it comes to financial things, if the child steals, the child is held accountable to return that money, either now or in the future. That's not something that's overlooked. So then the other schools say that that's the perspective. They look at it from that. Yes, the child is responsible for financial things, not the acts of obedience, etc. Whatever the disagreement is on either side, it's not a major disagreement. I would not even say it's not a major, I'd say it is a minor disagreement. But whichever school of thought you follow that, inshallah. Mental capacity is the third thing. So the first thing was Muslim, everybody agrees Muslim. Child, does a child need to give or not? And again, like I said, I'm going to go into some detail with a few evidences so you can get an idea of what's going on here. So we talked about children, Hanafi school no, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali school yes. Mental capacity, basically sanity. Is this person understanding the world around them? Do they have an understanding of the world around them? Sometimes they might have a deficiency in the understanding of the world around them. They might just not be street smart in this. Street smart is different, but we're talking about somebody who doesn't have the mental capacity, and each person will know. There's no barometer in the Sharia that says this person has mental capacity, this person doesn't. Each parent will know their own child, and they'll know what with the extent of their child's struggles and challenges and difficulties are. And so if a person is able to make logical deductions or intuitively perceive the outcomes of their actions, if I do this, then this will happen, they can distinguish between very clearly this is harmful, this is beneficial, etc. Those kind of things. So that's kind of how you'll define mental capacity. According to the Hanafi school, if sanity and mental capacity is a requisite of zakah, meaning if a person is mentally unstable, they don't need to give zakah in the Hanafi school. The Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school, even if they have the money, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school, they say that somebody who does not have mental capacity, they still need to give zakah. How are they going to calculate it? All of these things same as the child. It is the responsibility of the guardian. It is the responsibility of the guardian. So the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school says that this person who doesn't have mental capacity, the parent or the guardian, if they have the money which reaches it, maybe through some allowances or whatever, however they've received that money, if they have equal to or above the threshold that we're going to look at, they will need to give zakah. And it's the responsibility is on the parent or the guardian to give that zakah. And the arguments are somewhat similar in this regard. The arguments are somewhat similar in this regard as the discussions in the previous discussion that we looked at. Okay. So that's roughly the idea in terms of giving zakah, who needs to give zakah. Those are all the conditions to do with who needs to give zakah. Hopefully that's clear. There is one slight additional bonus side point that I'll mention. Some scholars put the condition of knowledge. And what they mean by knowledge is, according to the Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali school, the other three, not the Hanafi school, they say that zakah is an obligation. How do I explain this? So they say that if you had knowledge of zakah or you didn't have knowledge of zakah, you need to give. Listen to this carefully. The Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school says zakah is an obligation. If you didn't know about zakah, nobody taught you about zakah, you hadn't studied about zakah, that's on you. It's an obligation. What that means is you have to predate and calculate your previous zakahs. It's not that difficult to calculate previous zakahs, by the way. If you have bank accounts and things like this, you can get statements and you can work out on this date how much money did I have. You can backdate the nisab payments and see what was the nisab date, and I'll show you a website which allows you to backdate and all of these kind of things. And so you can calculate gold and silver, you can go back and check. It's a little bit more work, but you can go back and check the gold value of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and say, well, I probably had roughly around this much. And Allah doesn't expect you, if you're looking back and calculating, Allah doesn't expect you to be precise. You're doing your best. You're saying roughly I would have had this much, so I'm going to calculate it accordingly. So according to the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school, if you don't know about zakah, you still have to pay it. Which means if I learnt about zakah in today's session and I haven't paid for my previous 10 years, or I didn't, you need to calculate your previous years. Maybe you don't do it all in one go, it might be difficult. Calculate one each week or something like that. So last year let me calculate it this week, the year before I'll calculate it next week, and roughly based off what you can do. If you come to me and say to me, I don't know how to calculate it, I'll say I don't know how to calculate it, because all I'll say to you is it's whatever you can roughly work out using your accounts, using your statements, thinking about somebody gave me this much cash, or this is how much cash I had, this is how much money I had, my stocks roughly worth this much, I don't know how much it was worth, etc. You're going to have to work that out. That's not something that I can help you with. You're going to have to look at your specific scenario and kind of backdate that. Do you understand? But I can help you with finding out the nisab, the nisab calculate, the cost of nisab at that time, or I can help you with the threshold, I can help you with gold and silver prices, how to check scrap prices going past, etc. All of those things. According to the Hanafi school, they say that look, if you don't know about it, you don't have to give it of the previous years. However, it's not as simple as that. If you had the ability to learn, then you still have to give it. What does this mean? And I would say, if you're, for example, living in a Muslim majority country, there's no excuse there. Or if you have access to internet in any part of the world, I don't think there's an excuse for not giving zakah. Because a person who studies their religion, the fundamental pillar of our religion is to do salah and to do zakah. I think the first thing we teach Muslims, the earliest thing after the shahada, is the pillars of Islam and salah and zakah. So if you've heard the word zakah, you've heard the word about you have to give charity, that means you can easily go on the internet and type in zakah and learn about it. So in today's day and age, I would say if a person has the internet, in the Hanafi school, this person would still, if you say, I didn't know about zakah, I didn't know about having to give it on stocks or this or that, you're going to have to go back and calculate it, because you could have easily found out. If you were coming and performing Jum'ah somewhere, that person who was leading the Jum'ah, you could have asked them. So remember, we don't make excuses for ourselves, because when we go to Allah, the excuses will have to be legitimate. Allah will see straight through it. Did you try to ask? Did you try to learn? We looked at the story of Salman al-Farsi last night. Salman al-Farsi, he went from city to city to city to city seeking the Prophet ﷺ. And many new Muslims have a similar experience. And they're going from place to place, from person to person, from website to website, trying to learn about this religion. And eventually they come across the right person and they learn about the religion. Salman al-Farsi, when he sees the Prophet ﷺ, he sees the signs of the Prophet ﷺ, he literally breaks down in tears at the feet of the Prophet ﷺ, and he hugs him, and the Prophet ﷺ is like, what's happened? What's going on here? And he tells him his whole story, and it's shocking to the Prophet ﷺ that you went through all of this to get to here. And when you read that story, you're thinking, whoa, that's crazy. But so many new Muslims today we know of have gone through the exact same story. They go through a very difficult journey to get to Islam. The point that I'm making is, we don't have an excuse. We don't have any excuse to say, I didn't know about this. Not knowing, the scholars say, عَدَمُ الْعِلْمِ لَيْسَ بِعُذْرٍ. Especially in today's time, lack of knowledge and not knowing is not an excuse. If you don't have access to the knowledge, that's different. And we have enough access to the knowledge, etc. So khair. So some scholars mention the knowledge, but the reason I don't discuss that really as a point, I mention it as a bonus point, is because in today's day and age, with everybody who has a mobile, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for not knowing about zakah, etc. Now, what are the conditions relating to the wealth? So we're not talking about what wealth yet. So we're just talking about conditions. Number one condition is ownership. And remember, it's not, okay, I'm going to use a term again and again, which I explained on Friday. I'm going to use the term zakatable assets. I just want to explain what that term is. So when I keep using it, you're not thinking, what is this guy talking about? Assets is everything you own. The clothes you're wearing is an asset. The watch is an asset. The ring is an asset. The mobile is an asset. The tablet is an asset. The table you have at your house is an asset, because you could, in theory, trade that table for something else. The oven, the cooker, the microwave, all of these are assets. Anything that you own, it's an asset. You can trade it. If you can trade it, that's an asset. You don't have to give zakah on your mobile. You don't have to give zakah on your laptop. You don't have to give zakah on your car. So there are assets and there are zakatable assets. I am going to give you a list of zakatable assets. The assets that you own which you need to give zakah on. I have socks. I might have 10 pairs of socks, 30 pairs of socks, 50 pairs of socks that I've never used. They just sat there. Do I need to give zakah on the socks? No. So we need to distinguish between assets and zakatable assets. We're only going to give zakah on the zakatable assets. So to avoid confusion now, you don't need to ask me after this lecture, do I need to give zakah on this? Do I need to give zakah on this? Because I'll tell you exactly what you do need to give zakah on. Now you can ask, of course, just to make sure. For example, if I don't mention diamonds and you think diamonds are so precious, expensive, etc., do I need to give zakah on a diamond? I'll tell you, no, you don't. Rubies? No, you don't. Any precious stones? No, you don't. And we can have that discussion when we get there. But this is the point. I'm going to keep mentioning zakatable assets. And what I mean by that is those assets which you own all your assets, but we're talking about the zakatable ones. For example, cash, for example, gold, for example, silver. So I'll give you a really nice list that you can just kind of tick away. Do I have any gold and silver? No. Okay, I don't need to worry about that. Do I have any stocks? Yes. I need a bit more detail on stocks. Do I have cryptocurrencies? No. Do I have NFTs? Yes, I have NFTs. I need to know a little more detail about that. So any of the zakatable assets that we own, we need to give zakah on that. So ownership, we're talking about the conditions regarding our wealth. If I own it, I need to give zakah on it. If I don't own it, I don't need to give zakah on it. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, my zakat date is today. I calculate my zakah, fantastic. Tomorrow a family member passes away, and tomorrow that inheritance is going to come into my ownership. Or forget, not even tomorrow actually. Yesterday, my family member passed away of mine, as an example. And now I'm going to be receiving inheritance. That inheritance hasn't been calculated, it hasn't been distributed, it hasn't come into my ownership. So yesterday the person passed away. Today when I'm calculating my zakah, I don't need to give it on that, because it hasn't come into my ownership yet. When it comes into my ownership, I'll worry about it. So technically, there is a portion of that money which is mine, but it's not in my ownership. Does that make sense? So ownership is fundamental. Somebody might say to you every single day of their life, you know, one day I'm going to give you £1,000. I'm going to give you £1,000. I'm going to give you £1,000, but they just don't give it. So each year you're calculating zakah of that £1,000. No, because it's not in your ownership. As soon as you have ownership of it, that's when you will give zakah on it. Just because they're saying it doesn't mean anything. So that's the distinction in ownership, right? And so when it comes to ownership, either you will own it in your individual capacity. You might be a business, a sole trader, so you own it as part of your business. You might be a partner in a traditional partnership or a limited liability partnership. You might be a shareholder in a public or privately held limited company. Even if you're a shareholder, when you're buying stocks, etc., you are a shareholder, you own a chunk of that company. Does that make sense? So when I own, that's what we're giving zakah on the shares. When you're giving zakah on the shares, you're not giving zakah on what you own in terms of the money, the currency. You're giving zakah that I am a part of this business. I own, if I have shares in Apple, I will own a 0.00% of this company. That's mine. That's what a public liability is. Public liability company is. It's, you're selling your company in essence. And so that's important to bear in mind. So any ownership that I have, right? And that's why the scholars will talk about zakah on stocks and shares. Where did they get that from? It's all about ownership. If you own a part of a business, you need to give zakah on the part that you own. Zakah is not due on any charity. This masjid is a charity. It might have, for example, £5,000, £10,000 in its accounts. Does it need to give zakah? No. Why? It's not owned by anybody. The charity, that money is not owned by anybody. The community and the public is giving that money to the organization to spend it in a way which is beneficial to the community at the benefit of the usefulness of the community. So that means that the charity itself does not need to give zakah. Any waqf or any charitable trust or anything like this, there is no zakah given on that. And so, by the way, it is possible for one person to have multiple capacities of zakah. Listen to this. I might have to give my personal zakah. Yes, I have 5,000 in my bank account, I need to give zakah. I have 50,000 in my bank account, I need to give zakah. But I also am part of a business. So I am part of a business which has within their assets 10 million pounds. So I need to give some zakah in that capacity, depending on how much I own. And then I also am in a capacity of, for example, being as a limited company or something. So I might have to give zakah on my personal finances. I might have to give it on my business finances. So you might have to give it in different places. It's not just your personal that you need to bear in mind. Do you understand? So keep that in mind. So that's the first condition. Condition 2 is possession. You can own something but not have possession of it, and we'll look at that. So the second condition of the wealth is possession. Now possession doesn't have to always be actual. It can be actual or it can be constructive. Let me explain. Actual possession is simple. Any asset that I hold physically or some agent holds on my behalf. The bank holding that on my behalf, that is actual possession. As soon as I go to the bank, as soon as I make a transaction with Google Pay, Apple Pay, that money is mine to spend how I want. So that's actual possession. But what about non-actual possession, which you're talking constructive possession? It's anything which is not physically in my possession, but I have access to that underlying asset. So for example, if I have a house in the Maldives, it's not literally the house in my pocket. It's not the house I might have the deeds of that house. So somebody's given me the deeds of that house and somebody said this house belongs to you. That means that I have constructive possession, and it allows me with the deeds of this house to buy and sell this house, to make changes within the house, etc. So it could be constructive possession. So any zakatable asset that I have in my possession and it meets the other conditions like ownership and all of these other things, it will be included in my zakatable assets. Could I have something in my possession that I don't own? Yes, I could give this mobile phone and I can say to, for example, Sheikh Imran, I can say you can borrow this phone for 1 week. And so his zakat date is tomorrow. He has this in his possession, but is it in his ownership? No, it's not. So he doesn't need to give zakah on it as a theoretical thingy. But technically it still is within my possession and ownership. Why? Even though it's in his hand, at any point I can say I want it back. At any point I can say I want it back. Therefore it's still classed as being in my possession. So that's important to bear in mind. So zakatable assets which I've invested, I need to give zakah on that, because even though I don't have immediate, like it doesn't seem like I'm in possession of it, I can at any point pull that money out. Do you understand? And even if it's locked in, even if it's inaccessible during the investment period. This is important. We're talking investments. We look at if the company gives you shares or something like that, that's different. But we're saying if I've invested something and I put money into an investment and then it's locked up for 3 years, I can't take it out for 3 years. Sometimes in property investments, they lock it up for 10 years and say after 10 years you can take your pot out however much you want out after the 10 years. It doesn't matter whether it's locked or not, I still have ownership of that because that was a decision I made. I need to give zakah on that. You understand? So if you still have the underlying assets and you can benefit from the potential growth and the gains, that's classed as being in your possession. You understand? In regard to loans, the Hanafi scholars have classified loans as zakatable whilst you borrow them. So if I give you a loan, listen to this carefully, if I give you a loan, I don't have that money, I need to give zakah on it. I give you £10,000, Hanafi school says I need to give zakah. Why? At any point I can say I want that money back. At any point I can say, even if you come into a contract and you say that it's going to be over this period of time, etc., theoretically you can turn around and say, you know what, I want that money back, because you've borrowed it as goodwill. That's important to bear in mind. And so a loan is considered zakatable, that I can call it back at any time. Therefore the scholars deem it as liquid or cash in hand or tradable, etc. Right? So that's the second condition. The third condition in terms of what you need to give zakah, what the conditions of zakah are, is anything which is productive wealth. Productive wealth in Arabic is called mal nami. Mal nami is a fancy term. In essence, any money that I have or any trade stock that I have, that stock can kind of go up, it can go down, etc. Let me just summarize it into three to make it easier. Any cash or receivables. Any cash or receivables, that is going to be classed as actual wealth. Number two, gold and silver. That is mal nami. That is wealth that fluctuates, that goes up and down, that can have value, that can lose value, etc. And number three, it's trade assets. Anything I'm trading, any stock, anything that I have, etc., that will come under giving zakah. So those are kind of the discussions that I wanted to have on that. And we're going to go into now nisab. Nisab, what is this nisab? Everybody always talks about nisab. There's this certain amount. If you have that or above, you give zakah. If you have less than that, you don't need to give zakah. Nisab is the threshold upon which zakah becomes obligatory. And the kind of logic behind it, the rationale behind it is simple. It sets a benchmark. That anybody who is above this, they give zakah. Anybody who is below this, they don't give zakah. According to the Hanafi school, below this and not your necessary essentials, you can actually take zakah as well. So khair. The Prophet ﷺ mentions explicitly a hadith, you can find it in Sunan Abi Dawood. If you have 200 dirhams, which is silver, and you had saved it for a year, and you need to pay 5 dirhams of zakah on it. And the Prophet ﷺ says there's no obligation of zakah on gold until you have 20 dinars. If you own 20 dinars of gold and you've had it for a year, you need to give half a dinar on it. Simple. When the Prophet ﷺ said 200 dirhams of silver and 20 dinars of gold, we just ask, what is the value or the weight of 200 dirhams of silver and the weight of 20 dinars of gold? And so the scholars have then posited that gold is 87.48 grams. That's a figure that you might want to write down. If you have 87.48 grams of gold, it doesn't mean you have to have that much gold. It means 87.48 grams of gold, and I will tell you what the value of that 87.48 grams of gold today is: 4,589 pounds 18 pence. 4,589 pounds 19 pence. If you have that amount, you need to give, how much do you need to give? You need to give 5 dirhams. You need to give half a dinar. What's half a dinar? Well, it's simple. The Prophet said if you have 20 dinars, you give half a dinar. That means it's 1/40th. That's 2.5%. So we're going to give 2.5% of 4,589. Whatever I have, I'm going to give 2.5% of that. That's where that figure comes from. Do you understand? Now, scholars have differed in terms of whether you take the silver nisab or the gold nisab. The gold nisab I mentioned was 4,589 pounds 18 pence. Today, the date being Sunday the 26th of March. According to that date, that's going to be the amount. The silver nisab, which is 612.36 grams, today it equates to 374 pounds and 71 pence. Listen, some scholars take silver. So some scholars say if you have more or equal to 374 pounds 41 pence, you need to give zakah. And other scholars take gold. If you have more than 4,589 pounds 18 pence, you need to give zakah. My inclination is the gold nisab. And I can discuss it at the end, inshallah, what the rationale is behind that, what the reason is behind that, what the evidences are behind that. But scholars take both opinions. If your local scholar takes silver, there's not a big issue. It's not the end of the world. There's a valid reason for that, the same hadith. And if they take gold, there's a valid reason for that. The underlying reason is anfa' lil fuqara. What is the most beneficial for the poor person? Some scholars will say most beneficial for the poor is to give the silver. More people are giving zakah. Other scholars will say, well, wait a minute, somebody who has 400 pounds in their bank account left over, are you saying that they're rich? No. So anfa' for this person who's then poor would be that let's actually raise the nisab. It would be better for all of these people underneath. They don't need to give zakah. It doesn't matter if more people are not giving zakah, but at least we're not forcing these people who are struggling to give zakah. Looking at it from London perspective, a person who has 400 pounds in their bank, we wouldn't class that as rich. We wouldn't class that as somebody who's rich, especially with the cost of their next rent, with the cost of their next shopping, with the cost of looking at the next month. I wouldn't say so. But looking at 4,500, 5,000 pounds in the bank, I would say that seems to be a much more reasonable thing to say to somebody. Okay, you are somebody who needs to give zakah. Let's be realistic. If you have 5,000 pounds in the bank and you're thinking about your next month's rent or something like that, yeah, you can give zakah. And even that, it's 2.5%. Do you understand? So looking at it from that perspective, in different circumstances it'll be different, right? So I'll give you an example. In, for example, certain places you might even take the lower nisab. You might take the lower one deliberately. I'll give you an example. Think about this. Think about places where warfare is taking place. Take a simple example, Palestine. Palestine, where there's a situation of warfare, etc. In Palestine now, the people are struggling to even eat food, to find food. So what are they going to do? They've got gold and silver in the home. Are they going to keep the gold and silver or sell it and try and get some food with it? They're going to sell their gold and silver. When you sell all your gold and silver, try and understand this. It's the economics of zakat, etc. When you sell all your gold and silver, that means the shop that's buying all the gold and silver has lots of gold and silver. When a shop has a lot of a commodity, the value drops. If I have only one gold ring in my shop, it's going to be expensive. If I have 10,000 gold rings, anybody can come, the value is going to drop. So that means the nisab and gold and silver in Palestine is actually really low. Let's say, for example, the nisab would be lower than here, maybe £100. Are we going to say now somebody who has that needs to give zakah? No, we're not. So do you understand? Sometimes you'll take the higher nisab, deliberately understanding the circumstances of warfare. Sometimes you won't even take gold and silver nisab. Sometimes you will take the animal nisab. So a place like Palestine, because the gold and silver isn't relevant to their situation, but meat is. Meat is a standard which everybody can understand. That if you can buy meat, you're rich. If you can't buy meat, you're not rich. So sometimes that's the standard. So then some people will take that. So do you understand? That's the beauty of the zakah. It's not so simple as just one dimensional. The whole system is made, each society it's applicable to. So that's why I take the gold standard. That if somebody has and £4,589, now listen, I'm not saying if you have £4,589, I'm saying if your zakatable assets minus your debts equals that. That's why we're going to get there. So I'm just giving you this figure right now, the nisab. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a list of things that are going to basically the things that you need to give zakah on. But before that, the discussion of gold and silver we've done, there is one final discussion, is basically this 1 year business. I have to have owned it for 1 year. It comes in the hadith, the Prophet says if you've owned it for 1 year, then you have to give zakah on it. It's as simple as this. This is for somebody who's never given zakah. Listen to this, 4 things. Number 1, as soon as you own zakatable assets equaling the nisab, your zakah year begins. So listen carefully. I have no money. I received a gift, I spent it, received this, whatever. Today is the date, or let's say 1st of January to make it easier. 1st of January is the date that I received £4,589.18, and that was the nisab of the day. The nisab will change. Tomorrow the nisab will be different, the day after the nisab will be different. You need to check the nisab on the date of your zakah. That means that I will write down the 1st of January, this is my zakah date. The next year, when the next year comes, all I need to do is check. All I need to do is check, do I have the nisab of today? Let's say the nisab today is 4.6k. If I have the nisab for today, I need to give zakah. That's it. It's as simple as that. That's what the 1 year is, and I will give it on everything I own, all my zakatable assets. If somebody says to me, but I had £5,000 and then just yesterday somebody gave me a gift of £100,000, do I have to give it on the 100,000? Let's not ask that question. I'll give you the principle, you tell me whether you need to. Whatever you own on the date of your zakah anniversary, everything you need to give zakah on in terms of zakatable assets. If I got it yesterday, doesn't matter. If I got it a week ago, doesn't matter. If I got it 1 hour before calculating my zakah, it doesn't matter. It's as simple as every zakatable asset I own on the day of my, even if my whole year I had £1, £1, and the day before my zakah anniversary, I now get £10,000 as a gift. On the day of the zakah, I just need to calculate my zakatable assets, £10,000. The nisab, £6,000. I need to give zakah. Simple. Don't complicate things and say, well, I received this rental income last week, do I need to give zakah on that? Because I'm calculating my zakah today and that hasn't had a year. It's not. The year is only saying that when you first get the nisab, you just, for that first time you wait a year. Once you have a date, if my date is 1st of January, I don't need to think about the year thing. Khalas, done. When 1st of January comes, I will sit down and I will say, I need to calculate my zakatable assets. That talk Mufti gave me, I've got notes, I just need to check. How much money do I have? Cash in bank, this much. Cash in hand, this much. Gold and silver, this much. Stocks, nothing. This, nothing. Pensions, I have this, I need to work out this, like that. Once you've made a list of that, you'll then say deductibles, the things that I can take away, it's this thing here. And you can take that away and you can work out your zakah. So is that clear? if during your zakah, the entire year, your money goes below nisab, it doesn't matter. If your money goes below nisab, so nisab is 6k for example, and it drops to 3k, it drops to 2k, it drops to £1, and it goes up and down, it goes 10,000 and £2, and then to 10,500, and it comes down to £5, and it just goes up and down. But on the zakah anniversary, if you have it, fantastic, you give zakah. If you don't have it, you don't need to give zakah. I'll give you another example. Today's my zakah anniversary. The whole year I had £10,000. Today's my zakah anniversary, I have £1. Do I need to give zakah? Tomorrow I get £10,000. Do I need to give zakah? No. Because I just calculate on this one date. The zakah anniversary, that's the main thing. Fix your zakah anniversary. If you can make it an Islamic date, it's best, because the lunar year adjusts by 10 days according to the Gregorian solar calendar. So if you can make it an Islamic date like the 1st of Ramadan or the 5th of Ramadan, or better than that, if you make it just 5 days before Ramadan or something like that, you calculate it before Ramadan, and then you can start spending it throughout the month of Ramadan. I'll tell you that you can spread those payments, etc. The only time you need to think about that 1 year thing is if your money reaches zero or negatives. If it reaches zero or negatives, you don't have a zakah date anymore. Your zakah date is wiped. Your new zakah date will be when you receive the nisab again, and then you wait another year. Do you understand? So for most people that might not be the circumstance, but it can be. If you have, I'll give you an example. You're giving zakah every single year. 1 year you decide to buy a house. You borrow money from a family member of £50,000. You've gone into negative now. You calculate your zakatable assets £10,000, and you're in a negative of £40,000 because you borrowed 50,000. So now you're at zero. Your zakah date is gone. You don't need to give zakah. You don't have a zakah date until when the 1st of January, you don't need to calculate anything. When you next receive the nisab amount, then from that point you will wait another year and give it the next year. Does that make sense? So for most of us, if we're in debt and something like that, then you don't have a zakah date. But if you do have a zakah date, just stick with that zakah date. Don't think about 1 year and this and that. It gets confusing. You understand? So hopefully that explains the passing of the lunar year. Now, according to I'll quickly touch on this indication. According to the Hanafi and Maliki school, a person needs to have this zakatable assets at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. So the Hanafi and Maliki school, they say, beginning check, yes, no problem. Wait 1 year for the first time, and at the end of the year, that's it. Fluctuations in between, up, down, doesn't matter. If at the year end you have zakah assets, nisab, give it. If you don't, you don't give it. According to the Shafi'i and Hanbali school, you have to maintain the value of zakatable assets above nisab for the entire lunar year. So they say if it drops down, if it goes below, zakah year cancelled. Which is interesting, because it's slightly different to the Hanafi and Maliki school. The Shafi'i and Hanbali individuals here, for you, the first time you're calculating your date, you'll just, for example, check your date, and this is my date. As soon as you have that date, if it stays above nisab, and as soon as it drops below, your zakah date is gone. Then you will make a new date, and you will wait another year for that. And so every time your wealth drops below the nisab, you've lost your date, and you need to make a brand new date. So it's actually easier it's easier in the sense that for the Hanafi school and the Maliki school, they have to do less calculations. The date will remain until it's zero. In the Shafi'i Hanbali school, you're going to be basically checking. Now again, for the sake of convenience, if a person wants to take the Hanafi and Maliki position as a Shafi'i and Hanbali, you can do that. Or you can just say, for example, I'm going to fix this date and I'm just going to check it each year. A person can do that for the sake of convenience. You understand? Now, in terms of calculating the zakah, what are really the things that I'm going to add into my zakah? So I'm just going to give you a list of stuff. What are these zakatable assets? And I'll make this quick. I won't make this too. The detailed stuff we've covered. That's the complex stuff. The kind of framework, the nisab, all of that stuff. Now I'm just going to say, these are the things that you need to give zakah on, and I'm going to mention a few things quickly in that regard. Some details, you can quickly make those notes. So, any cash. All cash is zakatable. So you're going to write number 1, cash. That includes all earned salaries, any benefits you've received, any rental. And it's on the amount of the savings you have on the zakah anniversary. Whatever you have in cash, benefits, rental, it's not what's come in, it's whatever you have in the account, in your pocket, petty cash, whatever it is, that on that date of the zakah anniversary will be considered. Somebody says to me, but I paid zakah on £10,000 last year, and this year I now have £15,000. So do I only need to give it on the 5,000, or do I need to give it? That's a question because we've not understood the principle. On the day of my zakah anniversary, whatever I have owned, I give zakah on all of it. Does that make sense? So that question that comes because you've not understood. If you understand this one principle, it solves all of those questions. Whatever I have on my zakah anniversary, and remember, I'm not giving zakah on that. Listen carefully. I'm going to give you list A, which is your zakatable assets. Just write down all of your zakatable assets. Then I will give you list B, the things you can deduct. Then you will deduct list B from list A, and that will be the amount you need to give zakah on. So don't start thinking I have 5,000 in the bank, I need to give zakah on that 5,000, because you might have debts. All I'm saying is make a list of these things. So cash, any cash that you have. Now, according to the Hanafi school, of course, any money that you're spending throughout the year, you don't need to give zakah on it, etc. Zakah is not binding on any unlawful income. Unlawful income, there's no zakah on it. Allah doesn't want zakah from your unlawful income. Allah has no interest in it. Allah doesn't care for it. You do what you want with that. And the Shari'i approach is the entire unlawful income needs to be dispensed in charity. Notice I didn't say it needs to be given in charity. I said it needs to be dispensed. It needs to be disposed of in charity. Because the scholars say don't even have an intention of reward for this. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. And the best way to get rid of it is not in the bin, just to give it to charity, see if somebody can benefit. I don't want this wealth. Allah does not want your zakah from your, which shows you Allah's not interested in your money. If Allah was interested in your money, He'd say interest as well, zakah, this payment, zakah. No, Allah's, I don't want that. That's on you. You do what you want with that. If you're not willing to follow my instructions. So unlawful income, there is no zakah given on that. Any fund that is held in my current account at the end of the zakah year, I'll just do it on the total value. Interest-based accounts are not Sharia compliant, so if you can avoid them, avoid them. If you are receiving interest into your bank, all you need to do is simple. At the end of each month or at the end of each year, it will tell you how much interest has been paid into your account. It might be a couple of pennies, it might be a couple of pounds, however much it is, just take that amount and put it into charity. That's it. Now, you don't have to literally take the money in the bank. You can, for example, let's say I have an account and I have £2.50 of interest payments paid into me over 1 year. I don't need to take it from the bank. I can say, oh, I've got £2.50 in my pocket. I'll give that much and say, Allah, this is the interest payment, I'm getting rid of it. You understand? In thaman, in money, it doesn't have to be a line, it doesn't have to be the exact, I have to go to the bank and say, I want the £2.50 of the interest that you put in. No. Any money that you have, you can just make the intention that, Allah, this is, so similarly, you don't need to take money from the bank and say, this is the zakah money from the bank, I'm going to sell this gold. If I have to give £500 of zakah, and from yesterday somebody gave me a gift of £500, I can just say, Allah, this £500 that I've been given, I'm just going to use this as a zakah money that I need to give. So you just need to intend that wealth for that thingy. Do you understand? So investment account holders, you need to pay zakah on the investment balances as well as the profits in their ownership, in your ownership that you own at the zakah you earn. So cash is simple. There's nothing complex in this. Receivables, anything I am going to receive. I mentioned loans. If I've given somebody a loan, I've given you £10,000 to borrow, that's a receivable that I will get. I will calculate zakah on that. But listen, sometimes I've given a loan of £50,000 and it's too difficult for me to pay that money in zakah now. No problem. Just calculate it and write it down. So for example, this person I've given him £50,000. In 5 years, I am now going to receive £50,000 from this person. I don't want to give it for 5 years. No problem. Each year, just calculate £50,000. The zakah is going to be this much. This next year, this much. Next year, this much. Next year. When you receive all of that money, you can do back payments and give all of that zakah from that if you want. So you don't have to give it right now. You can just calculate it and just make a note of it. Put it in your notes in your mobile or something like this somewhere, or let a family member know as well, just in case you pass away, and say that this amount I need to give in zakah, but I've given money to borrow. When I receive it back, I'll do all the back payments. So you don't have to give it right now if you can't. Sometimes you don't have as much money, you're struggling, etc. You've given somebody money. If you give zakah on that £50,000, it's going to be a big dent in your savings as such. So what you'll say is, I'll calculate it. When they give me that money back, I'll then give it. You understand? For those in business, credit sales, anything which is outstanding payments from trade, stock and assets, you need to give it. You cannot give zakah on outstanding, you don't need to give zakah on outstanding fees, wages, salary, any payouts, claims and damages, settlements, shares, inheritance shares, etc. You don't need to give it on that. Khair. Cash, done. Quickly, let's look at gold and silver. Gold and silver is very, very simple. It's actually just a handful of principles that I'm going to mention, and we move on. The schools differ in this. The Hanafi scholars say all gold and silver is zakatable. Any gold and silver you own, you need to give zakah on it. Whether you wear it, whether you store it, whether it's an investment, whether it's part of your business stock, those are all gold and silver. According to the Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali school, the three schools of law, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, they say only gold and silver, that is trade stock, that is investment, or that is an asset class in my investment portfolio, they are zakatable. Everyday gold and silver that is owned and worn by a woman for personal use is not zakatable. Listen to this. Everyday gold and silver which is worn and owned by a woman. Now, for example, a woman might say, but wait a minute, there is some gold and silver I have in a chest of drawers at home. I've never worn it. It's not my style, I'm never going to wear it. But it's for my personal use. Yes, you don't need to give zakah on that either. You don't need to, why? It's all about intent. Is your intent to sell that? No, you don't need to give zakah on it. It's personal use. You might give it as a gift to your children, that's personal use. You might pass it on to some, that's personal use. When you intend to sell it, that's different. Now you'll have to give zakah on it. Does that make sense? So a woman who has jewelry at home, she's not using it, it's just a store of value, for example. She's saying, I'm just keeping this as kind of, I'll use it for personal thing or something like that. She doesn't need to give zakah, according to the Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali school. The Hanafi school says, it doesn't matter whether it's for personal use or not, you need to give zakah on all of it. Now, according to the other schools, you just need to give it on pure gold and silver. According to the Hanafi principles, even if it's 9 carats gold, you need to give zakah on that, to the value of the 9 carats. So 9 carats is a different value to 24 carat, for example. So you'll just check, this ring is 10 grams, the scrap value of 9 carats is this, I'll calculate it like that. Do you understand? So gold and silver, what's the price? How should you calculate this? You can weigh it yourself, or you can have somebody weigh it for you. If you have a ring, for example, and it has some precious stones, like it has diamonds or something like that, you don't need to give it on the diamonds, just the weight of the gold and silver. So you can try and go to a jeweler's and say, can you work out what the weight of just the gold ring is, not the stone? Is there a way? They might be able to do it, they might not be able to do it. They'll be able to roughly tell you that that's going to be roughly this much, you can go with that. If you know the weight of the stone, fantastic. If you don't, you can try and ask somebody to work it out who's in the field, professional in the field. If they can work it out, fantastic. If not, just go with a safe figure. Do you understand? So gold and silver, you price it according to scrap value. Use scrap value, it's the best use of value. So for example, if I have 100 grams of gold, just check what's the scrap value. You can go online and literally type in UK scrap value of gold, or London, or whatever you want to do. You can ask your local jewelers and say, what's the scrap value of 1 gram of gold today, and they'll tell you this is the value. You have 200 grams, you will do 200 multiplied by 1, in essence 200 grams worth of kind of the gold that you have. You understand? Same with silver. It's that simple. It's that simple. That's all you're going to calculate. Now, from these things, I'm going to mention number 4, non-zakatable assets. What things do I not need to give zakah on? Residential homes. If you have a house here, and I mentioned to you guys on Friday, if you have a house in the Bahamas, and you have a house in here, and you have a house there, and you have a villa there, these are all residential homes, you're living in them. Even if you've not lived in it for 10 years, but it's just a home that you're going to live in, you don't need to give zakah on that. Cars. If you have 5 cars, 10 cars, 30 cars, but they're in your garage, and for some reason you're buying loads of cars, you don't need to give zakah on those cars if they're for personal use. As soon as you're selling, that's different. We're not talking about selling, we're talking about personal. Electrical assets. If I have a mobile, a laptop, 10 laptops, 50 laptops, and I'm just using them, I'm not even using them, I'm just a collector. I like collecting things. I've got the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and I have them kind of on display in my house, but I'm not planning on kind of selling them. I just enjoy them. It's just something as a collector's item I've got right now. No problem. You don't need to give zakah on that. Clothing, all of these kind of things, there is no zakah given on these kind of things. Do you understand? So none of these things you need to give zakah on. I'll also mention as a side point the things you don't need to give zakah on. If I give you £10,000 to borrow, and you say to me, you know what, I'm not repaying you, I'm not going to give you your loan back, We didn't have it in a contract. We didn't have it written. You should always have your contracts and agreements in writing. It's from the verse of the Quran. But let's say you didn't have a contract and the person says, I'm not going to pay you back. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? You can't do anything about it. So you don't need to give zakah on that. If you've given somebody money to borrow and it's now what they call a lost debt or lost wealth or something like that, you're not going to receive it back. It's basically you don't need to give zakah on it. Also, if you are convinced you're not going to get it back, then you don't need to give zakah on it. So you've given somebody money to borrow and they've left the country and they were involved in some shady business and they've left the country, and now how am I going to actually get the money back? You don't need to give zakah on that. If they do give it back, simple, just backdate the payments. So, he did give it back, he gave me the 50,000, just backdate the payments and say, well, okay, I didn't expect him to give it back, I didn't give zakah then, but for the last 5 years, I'm going to now backdate the payments. He did give it back, alhamdulillah, and so you calculate it like that. Does that make sense? So there's nothing really complex in that regard, in terms of those basic assets, and that's generally the case for most people. For most people, that's how it will be approached. The next discussion is shares and stocks, and it's not actually, shares and stocks is easier than even the gold and silver stuff. It's really easy. It's as simple as this. Should we take a 30-second break?
30-second break.
Zakah, look, I'm telling you, zakah is detailed. If you get it once, you never need to attend a lecture on zakah again. I'm telling you, I don't have to prepare for this material ever now. Maybe if something new comes up like cryptocurrency or this and that, I'll have to look into that. But I'm telling you, zakah, if you learn it once properly and you make your notes, you just refer back to your notes. You never have to study the subject again. Never. It's as simple as that. Because it's not going to change. Do you every single month study salah again? Do you study salah, how to perform salah and this and that, and how do I make wudu, how do I do this? It's just something that once you've learned it, you know it. Hajj and Umrah, if you've been Umrah and Hajj, you might forget it. You just take the same book that you used last year and you'll just follow the book. Oh, now I need to do this in Umrah, now I need to do this in Umrah, and you do the Umrah. So similarly, zakah is the same. It's not constantly changing. There's some principles, get them, write them down, learn them. That's why it's detailed, right? The only reason it's detailed is because if I give you this once, I've armed you for the rest of your life. You know how to do zakah. So very quickly now, shares. It's simple. Your shares will either be one of two strategies of trading. You will, and if you don't understand this, is because you're not involved in this. Don't worry about it. It's a specific field. If you understand it, you'll know. You will either be doing buying and holding strategy, where you buy a stock and you hold that stock, or you will be using it as savings and a store of wealth, or third, you will be doing day trading. Quick trading. We'll look at the difference in them. If you're buying and holding, the majority of people, when you buy into Apple and you buy into Microsoft and you're buying into these different places, you're buying to hold and you're hoping that the value will go up and then you will sell it later on. So this buy and hold strategy, you do not need to give zakah on the entire amount that you see in your portfolio. When you open up your trading app, Trading 212, whatever it is, and it says you have £10,000 invested and the market value, current value right now is £10,000, you don't need to give zakah on that entire amount. That's not what you need to do. He's smiling. He's got Trading 212, right? So we know who to jump after the session. No, I'm joking. So you don't need to give it on the end. You don't need to give it on the entire market value of what you own. You just need to give it on the net zakatable assets in that company, which is a crazy thing to say. What does that mean? In essence, I need to sit down. I've invested in Apple. I need to get the balance sheet of Apple, and I need to determine in this whole balance sheet of maybe 10, 15 sides, however long their balance sheets are, they've got properties and they've got this and they've got this. I need to go through and find out what zakatable assets do they have, how much cash do they have, how much gold do they have, how much silver do they have, how many debts. How am I going to do this? For Apple, for Microsoft, for this, for that, for every single Meta, Facebook, whatever I've invested in, how am I going to do that? It's difficult. So what the scholars did is they have said, don't do that. Whatever your market value is, however much you own, let's say you open up your app and it says £10,000, you just need to take 25% of that and put that into your list. So remember, we said cash over here, we said gold and silver over here. Whatever I'm going to open my apps and I'm going to see, okay, I have £10,000, 25% of that is 2,500. 2,500, I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it inside this. Simple. Where did this 25% number come from? I'll tell you. A number of scholars in 2018, they sat down and they looked at the FTSE 100 companies, the main companies that people invest in, the FTSE. They were reviewed. 66 out of 100 of them had net zakatable assets below 25%. Below 25%. What about the other 34? The other 34 were non-compliant, non-Sharia compliant. So that doesn't matter. So we're looking at the FTSE, the 100 companies which were Sharia compliant, out of them, 66 of them, they had net zakatable assets below 25%. Meaning, if you don't want to literally calculate, you can take this proxy, and that way you will always be in the safe zone, basically. So 25% of your trade, if you are buying and holding, that's for most people. So just, it's so simple. You don't, some people might have been told, and you might have been told, you need to give it on the entire amount. No, you don't. You just need to give it on 25% of that, because you don't need to give. Why? Understand, it's not money anymore. You own a part of a business. And in business, you don't give zakah on the entire business, do you? When you own a business, you only have to give it on the zakatable assets in that business. I don't have to give it on the shelves and the property and the cars and this and that. I only have to give it on the cash in bank and this and that. So when you've invested in shares and stocks, that stock paper, what you have, what you receive, is you own this percentage of this company. When dividends are paid out and this is paid out, you're going to get this money. So you're in essence holding a part of that company. You don't have to pay on the entire company, just as you don't pay on the entire of your business. You don't need to pay on the, etc. Do you understand? So it's as simple as that. You just need to pay on the zakatable assets, which is a 25% proxy. If you are doing savings and a store of wealth, and you're investing because you have 10 million pounds, for example, and people with big money, you don't leave your money in the bank. Why? It just loses value. It just loses value over years. It just depreciates. So what you do is you put it into some sort of an investment. You put it into property or something, which will go up, or you put it into some sort of a safe investment, which might go up by 1% each year, but you're kind of tackling inflation, etc. So again, it's the same as the previous one. If it's just savings and store of wealth, you will just do 25%. Find out how much it is, you'll do 25% of that. The only difference is if you're doing day trading. And day trading, if you don't do day trading and you do weekly trading or whatever you want to call it, but what does day trading in essence mean, or trading mean? It's basically you only trading with the intention to sell and capture short-term positive price fluctuations with a fixed intention that I'm going to sell at the very outset. It's quick investments. It's like I'm buying to you're basically riding the wave, etc. If somebody does day trading, you'll know who you are. If somebody's selling and capturing short-term positive price fluctuations, you need to give it on the full value of the investment. You need to give it on the full value, because for you it's more a currency. For you it's not an investment in the business. For you it's a currency. You're trading currencies in the name of stocks, basically, in the name of companies. That's what you're doing. So do you understand? That's it. That's all it is. Any questions on stocks and shares? It's simple, isn't it? It's nothing complex in that regard. Khair. Go on. Is there a question here somewhere? I think he's just stretching. So, okay, it's a long session. I think he's stretching. Regarding private equity and startups and things like this, because look, private equity and startups, again, if you don't know what this is, you don't need to worry about it. Generally, if you are somebody who's investing in private equity and startups, you've got millions. Nobody's going to come to me and say, can you invest in this startup? I'm going to give you £10, and what's that going to do? When you go as a private equity or startup, you're basically saying, we've got this new business idea, we want you to invest £10 million, we're going to lock it in for 5 years, and we're going to make, and you see the potential in this business, you'll invest in it. So this is generally for people who have bigger numbers. You're not going to be doing it yourself. You're going to have accounts and teams and all of this. For this person, you need to do it the legitimate way. There's no 25% proxy for you, because this is not going to be like a normal company. Startups have very different numbers as opposed to established companies that you're investing in. So if you're invested in a startup or some sort of a private equity investment, you need to determine the ratio and the percentage using the kind of balance sheets and all of these kind of things, and you need to work it out. And I can give you an example afterwards if you ask for it. Do you understand? So, bonds. Regarding bonds, bonds are not Sharia compliant. There are some slight different bonds that somebody talked about recently, private bonds. I'm not sure about them. I'll need to look into that. So if you have a question on private bonds, come to me. I'll see if I can check it now. But generally bonds, if a person invested in bonds or treasury bills or anything like this unknowingly, you should liquidate that money, and you should as soon as you can. However, when you liquidate that money, because it's not permissible, the principal amount of the bond, the cost of the bond, zakah needs to be given on that. Any profits, that is interest payments, because bonds operate on an interest basis, any profits should be given away in charity. It's not the thing you want to hear. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to present to you the Sharia. The Sharia says bonds are not a Sharia compliant. I'll give you an example. I invested in bonds and I put £10,000 into bonds. 5 years later, that's now £15,000. Sell it, zakah on the 10,000, the 5,000 you give away in charity. It's because it's impermissible investment. Don't get into investments without doing the legitimate screening and Sharia compliance discussions and all of these kind of things. This is part of normal business trading. If you see yourself as really able to do business, then you should be doing it according to the Sharia compliant way. Clear? Khair. Next thing, pensions. Pensions are always brought up. So pensions is an interesting one. I literally, normally when it comes to pensions, I literally read the what I sent to people when it comes to pensions. Pensions are of two types. I think Farhan asked this. No, not Farhan. Somebody. So pensions are of two types. There's now again, you would just need to work out there. You just need to work out what kind of pension you have. There's two types of pensions you can have. Either it's going to be a defined benefit scheme or it's going to be a defined contribution scheme. It's as simple as just go to your workplace and say, am I defined benefit or am I defined contribution? It should say, if it's defined benefit, there's no zakah. There's no zakah. So defined benefit is normally where the employer or the government, they guarantee a specified pension and you'll get it on your retirement. You don't need to give zakah on that type of investment. And so if that's your pension fund, pension simple for you. Defined benefit, no zakah. If it's a defined contribution scheme, this is slightly different. What's a defined contribution scheme? A defined contribution scheme is where the employee, me and you, we have a say as to where the pension assets are going to be invested. I can say I want to invest in this, I want to invest in this. I can have some say in that regard. Not total say, but I can have some say inside of it. And there will be investment made on behalf of the employee. Sorry, the employer, the guy who's making you work, he can choose where that investment goes into, that pension goes into. And you can say, I want it to go here or I want it to go here. So your employer, if he's doing defined contribution, he can decide where he wants to send it. Do you understand? And so that's how it's going to be. Zakah is given on this. Zakah is given on this. So for example, there are 5 or 6 different places that defined contribution scheme can invest in. I'll quickly say them. He can either put it into a Sharia fund, he can put it into a direct property fund, he can put it into an equity fund, he can put it into a mixed asset fund, or sometimes they call it diversified or multi-asset, or they can put it into bonds. They have a choice of these 5 in essence places. So a defined contribution, if you just ask, quick phone call to HR, you ask your HR, human resources, where is my investment going into? They'll tell you Sharia fund, direct property fund, equity fund, mixed asset fund, or bonds, or fixed interest, or whatever they call it, fixed income fund. It's going to be one of these. What do you need to do? When you're giving zakah on this, you actually need to break down your pension. You need to get balance sheets again, and you need to work out, okay, in terms of this, how much of this is invested in this and that. We're not going to do that. The scholars did the same thing for us again. The top 20 most common pension funds were analyzed by these scholars. The top 20 most common pension funds were analyzed for the UK. The data was used using the UK's most comprehensive sources of online investment, such as TrustNet, Financial Times, Morningstar, these kind of companies. And a breakdown of all of the assets of each pension fund was formulated in a spreadsheet. And then they used the weighted average to determine the average assets, but basically they did some maths. They did some work. And they basically came out with a calculation that, look, if it's a Sharia fund, you need to give 26% of your assets. So if you say, you open your pension pot and it says you have £10,000 in your pension pot, if yours is a Sharia fund for defined contribution, 26%. If it's a direct property fund, 15% zakah. Equity fund, 27%. Mixed asset fund, 50%. And bonds, 100%. I'm going to say that again for those of you who are writing. If it's a Sharia fund, 26%. If it's a direct property fund, 15%. If it's an equity fund, 27%. Those 3 again, so you're writing Sharia fund 26%, direct property fund 15%, equity fund 27%, mixed asset fund 50%, and bonds 100%. 100%. So all you will do is you will sit down and you will and again, you're not giving zakah yet, you're just putting this into your list. Cash, I've got this much. Gold, I've got this much. Silver, I've got this much. Pensions, I've got £10,000 in there. So I'm going to do £10,000 and I'm going to do 2.5% of this 26%. So you do basically 0.65%. Multiply my £10,000 by 0.65% or 0. If it's 15%, 0.375%. If it's 27%, 0.675. If it's 50%, 1.25%. 100%, you know how to do that. So you just give 2.5%. You'll just take that number, whatever it is, 26%, and you'll put it in your zakatable assets. Put it into your zakatable assets. So now I've got pension fund inside of that as well. Do you understand? Quickly, very, very simple. If you have investment land, let's say, and this is often when you have back home, etc. You've got land back home. Let's say you probably never been back home as an example, but your parents and your forefathers, etc. They come from a different country or something like that. They owned land. They passed away. That land was passed on to you now. So you have a chunk of that land or the entire land or whatever it is. So you now own a piece of land. If the land is just land, we're not talking about properties, nothing like this. If the land is for personal use, or it's family house or something like that, or you're just storing value, or it's an investment, then zakah is not payable on that land. Right? So store of value and investment I'm putting together. I'm saying if it's just for store of value, that you know what, if I sell this land now, I'm not going to make much money, I'll wait for a little while, I'll just keep value. Maybe when I think is I'll consider at a later stage or something like that. I'm not actively trying to sell it or anything like that. Do you understand? So, and what does it mean by store of value? So sorry, we're not talking about a person trying to sell it. We're talking store of value means I am only having this piece of land that if I ever get into a difficult situation, I can quickly sell it, liquidate those funds, and I can use it. That's what store of value is. Do you understand? So if I ever need those funds, I can use it. So if that's the land, no zakah. If you have purchased the land or you have the land and your intent right now is to sell it, to trade it, then you need to give zakah on the value of the land, market value. So all you'll do is simple as this. That land is worth £10,000. I'll use £10,000 always because it's an easy number. It's worth £10,000. You will just take that £10,000 and put it into this list, because that's the market value. Do you understand? So it's as simple as that. Investment property, very simple. It's nothing complex. I'm going to give you some rules which covers everything. If I purchase a real estate property, and I'm saying real estate property, it could be house, it could be factories, whatever it is, and I buy it with the intent to sell and flip on the market value, zakah is payable on the entire real estate. I buy a house, I'm going to sell the entire house. I'm selling it. I need to give zakah on the entire house. House is worth 250,000, give zakah on the entire house. Simple. So if my intent is to sell the entire property, zakah on the entire property. If I'm investing in a property and it's a long-term store of value and I don't have the intention to sell at present, no zakah. The principle is the same, isn't it? I'm not planning on selling, I'm just storing value. For example, there might be people who have a house right now and they're thinking, you know what, I'm just going to keep that on the side. I'm not renting, I'm not doing anything. I'm just keeping it as a store of value. When I need to sell it, if I need money, I'll use it then. If you're leasing a property, if you're receiving rental income, you don't need to give zakah on the property. But any money that comes in, and you have it on the day of your anniversary, you give zakah. Listen to this, listen to this. People get this wrong for some reason. This year I received £10,000 on rent. £10,000 on rent. I spent 5,000 in renovations, I spent 3,000 on a holiday, and I spent 1,000 on a brand new bed. £10,000 I received in rental income this year. 5,000 was spent renovations, 3,000 was spent on holiday, 1,000 was spent on bed, £9,000 have gone. On the zakah anniversary, how much do I have? £1,000. You only give zakah on £1,000. People, for some reason, they say, I received £10,000 rental income, do I need to give it on the entire rental income? The rule is the same rule. On the date of my zakah anniversary, how much wealth do I have right now? If only £1,000 remains, even though I received 10,000 rent, you don't give on 10,000, you give on what's left over. Which is the beauty of Islam. The Western model is, before you even make your income, your £40,000, £30,000, before it even reaches your bank, the government taxes you. The Sharia says that's your money, you invested, you've worked hard for it, spend it as much as you want. All I want is on the day of your zakah anniversary, whatever's left over, you give that into zakah. Whatever else you want to spend, you spend as much of it you want. If you spend all of that £10,000, you don't give a penny in zakah. Why? It's spent. There's no tax in the Sharia. The zakah is after you've done your spending, on the date of the zakah anniversary. Does that make sense? So that's very, very important. So that's all of property stuff done. There's only one last thing. If you're doing redevelopment, or you're doing properties which are undergoing refurbishment, and you've acquired them to resell, then you're going to give it on the current market value. It's difficult, I know, to work out the current market value, but if you're in redevelopment and properties, you'll have an idea that currently at the state that it is in, if I was to try and sell it now, yes, I'm going to continue redeveloping it, it's going to be better, the bathroom hasn't been done yet, but right now, what's the market value? That's the zakah you're going to give. Do you understand? So hopefully that's clear. That's all property related stuff. Whether you're renting, whether you're leasing, whether you're buying to sell, whether you're owning just to, if it's just a house you own for the sake of you owning, there's no zakah on it, etc. All of that's covered in those four kind of simple principles. So there's nothing else on that in that regard. The next discussion, I guess, is cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is very much, now again, look, in terms of cryptocurrency, yes, there's discussions therein, permissibility, impermissibility. I'm going to be very frank, I'm going to be very simple. My position on cryptocurrency is permissibility. However, there are conditions within that. Of course, the cryptocurrency that you purchase, there has to be Sharia compliance, just like stocks, right? So it has to be Sharia compliance, etc. Look, yes, I understand that there is extreme volatility, there's risk, there's speculation. Some say there's a lack of governance and the absence of a real asset. Those are different discussions that you can have another time. Volatility does not mean something's haram. Volatility means, I'll say, be careful. Volatility in stocks is there. Volatility in this is there. Any investment in land, there's volatility. That doesn't mean it makes it impermissible. So those are side discussions which we can have at another point, but that's not to do with anything. Sharia compliance is basically, look, you need to do number one, legitimacy screening. Is this crypto asset a genuine project, or is it a scam? Is it a rug pull? You need to know if it's legitimate. Number two, that's legitimacy screening. Is it legitimate? Project screening. Is the project Sharia compliant? Meaning, if it's involved in the pornography industry, or if it's involved in this industry or that industry, tobacco, alcohol, any of these other industries which scholars have deemed gambling industry, then it's not going to be permissible. So project screening. If it's for gaming, no problem. There's the level of permissibility in that. If it's for this, so there's different types of coins, right? Gaming coins and these coins and these, and there's assets being built, etc. Financial screening. That, does it meet the financial criteria for Sharia compliance? Specifically, if it's an equity-based token. Now, if you don't know, you don't know. That's on. If you don't do cryptocurrency, don't worry about this. But for those individuals involved, they need to look at these things. They need to do token screening. They need to do staking screening. And when it comes to staking, the mechanism of the staking, etc. All of that, the permissibility and all of that, there's details in that, but we're not going into cryptocurrency here. That's you investing. We're talking now about the ruling. When it comes to, if you're doing trading with cryptocurrency, meaning you're doing kind of day trading, that kind of thing, again, you're selling and capturing positive price fluctuations, you need to give it on the full value of the crypto asset. Simple. Open up your crypto app, and whatever it says, in terms of Binance or this or whatever different apps you have, you open it up. If it says you have £10,000 current market value, you need to give it on the entire market value if you're doing day trading. If you're doing buying and hold investment strategy, you're buying a crypto asset with the intention that it's going to develop, it's going to build, etc. I know that I can see that they've got these projects coming up, it's going to build in value, and then I'm going to sell it at that point. Then for this individual, it's slightly different. There's specific rulings. If it's coins, crypto coins, or exchange tokens or payment tokens, you do need to give it on the 100%. You do need to give it on the 100%. So if it's a cryptocurrency coin, an exchange token, a payment coin, you need to give it on the entire percent. If it's a security token, again, you need to give it on the 100% if your intention is to sell. If your intention is to sell. Now there are some details in this. Specifically, come and see me if it's specific. But generally, if it's a utility and platform token, again, if your intent is to sell eventually, 100% of the holding. If it's an asset-backed token, your intention is to sell, 100% on it. Governance token, if your intent is to sell, 100%. Cryptocurrency is like cash. It's seen as a currency, so you're going to give it on the entire thing. In NFTs, I'm literally going to keep this to 2 sentences because most people don't even have a clue what NFT is, and even those who bought NFTs don't know what an NFT is. They don't know what they bought or anything like that. If you're trading NFTs, then whether you own the asset or you own certain rights, the NFT will be zakatable. Why? The NFT is now a trade asset. If you're trading something, you're selling something. If I'm selling a house and trading a house, I have to give it. If the NFT, I'm using it as a trade, then I'm going to have to give it on that. If the NFT is not being traded, but I purchased to hold, then zakat is not due on this asset until you decide to sell it. until you decide to sell it. And obviously the owner of the NFT has to have the proprietary rights. If you know NFTs, you'll know it's like an image, it's like a painting. If you have a painting, you don't need to give zakah on it. If you plan to sell that painting, you need to give zakah on it. It's like trade stock. So NFTs just falls into that. It's very simple. Precious metals, no zakah on precious metals. Other than gold and silver, if you have copper, aluminium, diamonds, stones, whatever, rubies, anything, emeralds, you don't need to give zakah on any of that. We're coming to the ending now. Literally, I think that's everything done. Yeah, that's everything done. So now in terms of the this list, and the rest of it's going to be very, very simple, inshallah. So what we currently have now are the list of all of the things that you are going to give zakah on. Add that up, you'll have a sum at the end of it. Maybe it'll come to 100,000 or 10,000 or 5,000 or whatever it comes to. You've got something there. Now, there is one last discussion in terms of the things that we are going to take away. There are debts, the deductibles, liabilities, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to quickly take a look at that, inshallah. I have it much more simplified on my laptop, so I'll just quickly mention it from there, inshallah. It's exactly what I mentioned on Friday in regard to the deductibles. I'm not going to really be adding anything to that. It's exactly the same. If my laptop decides to start up, if it doesn't start up, I'm going to have to clear so far? Alhamdulillah. Is there anybody who has any other questions regarding the assets? Go on.
Oh, just general quite a few.
Okay, go on. Whilst I sort this out.
So with just coming back to the pensions, and there's different pots that there's methodologies of investments in that pensions do. Let's just say one of them is it goes into bonds and so on, and that obviously that therefore is haram, isn't it? So is the pension in itself therefore haram? And then would you then give zakat on it? And should you then, I don't know, what do you do with that pension? Do you dispose of it?
Yeah, so in terms of the bonds one, I'll check for you specifically, because as far as I know that would be impermissible, the specific pension from there. So I'll check for that one, inshallah. Just let me know, remind me of that, I'll share that, inshallah. Any other questions? Once I quickly think of this.
Can you change your zakat date?
No, so you can't change your zakah date, but what you can do, like, look, if you don't know your zakah date, just make one, an arbitrary one. But what you remember, when you calculate your, let's say my zakah date is 1st of January, I have 1 year to fulfill that zakah. So if I calculate it on 1st of January, that doesn't mean 2nd January I need to give it away. I can give sadaqah tomorrow and sadaqah the day after, and I can say I'm going to give my zakah in Ramadan. If a person chooses to do that, you can do that. So you can wait, and you can wait for a situation where you want to give it. You hear about a family member who's struggling. And by the way, when you're giving zakah to family and stuff like that, you don't even have to say this is zakah. You can say here's a gift. In your mind, if you have the intention of zakah, that's sufficient. It's between you and Allah. It's an act of obedience. So if you say here's a gift for you, and your intention is I'm giving it as zakah, your zakah is fulfilled. It's completely permissible. So you can do that as well. Question? Another question? How are we getting the questions from the sisters? Are you receiving on your? Okay. So there's somebody amongst the sisters who you can message, inshallah, or you can ask to send your questions through, and then they'll read it out on this side. Inshallah, I think this is not starting up because there's no battery. So I'm going to quickly put this on, if I can. Jazakallah. 1 second. There we are. Any other questions? Yes?
Any questions from the sisters? No? Yeah. One second, Sabrina. 1 second. Sure.
If you just put it on loudspeaker and...
Mike is who does the question.
I think the person's saying the question. So if you just press it here, we'll start. We'll ask them just.
Oh, sorry, sister. 1 second. Yeah, go ahead.
If it's a pension, would you not know if it was contribution? Because you would be the one knowing where you want to. Your employers would ask you where you want to put your money. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. So that's the point, that you would know whether it's defined contribution or if it's what was the other one that I said? Defined benefit? A person would know. A person would know in essence. But I'm just saying, just in case there's somebody who doesn't know, who's, maybe they signed a contract early on and they don't know now, they didn't think about zakat back then and things are just going on. So if you want to go back and check, for example, you didn't think about zakat on that person just needs to ask and they can find out quickly, right? Do you understand?
If it was from where it was, they would be contacting you every year, would they not, to ask you what you want to contribute? So
what I'm understanding is you're just clarifying that the person should know what it is.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. If a person knows, a person knows. As in, I'm just trying to understand. Is it a zakat question specifically, or are you just clarifying that a person should go on?
Yeah, it is regarding zakat, because if it. Well, I don't know, I'm just a bit confused with that.
No, go on. It's okay. I might have just misunderstood, that's all.
No, the person would obviously know what kind of pension there is, because would they not be contacted every year being asked, where do you want to put your money? So if they're not being asked that, then it wouldn't be that pension, would it?
Okay, so the sister is saying that if it's defined contribution, you should know. Yeah,
is that right?
No, that's not the case. That's not the case, because I've got somebody gone.
So in terms of, there's two different types. So there's defined benefit and defined contribution. Defined benefit generally only sits within local government, but even then, you can still have a defined contribution. Sometimes they don't ask you, so it could be.
So the brothers mentioned that sometimes you can have defined contribution without you knowing about it.
All right.
Yeah. So it's a case of just, if you just specify and identify which type it is, then you can decide accordingly. If it's benefit scheme, the normal one, you don't need to give zakah on it. If it is, then you do need to give zakah. If it's the other one, defined contribution, you need to give zakah on it. Any other questions?
Yes, in terms of nisab, how do you establish someone that he qualifies for the zakat? If, let's say, there's a family member and he probably has some money, put aside that we don't know about. And you're going to investigate the person if he's got any money put aside, even though he shows signs of poverty. Yeah.
So regarding giving zakah, there is a level of level of being meticulous that's required. So you would need to know this person's personal situation. Which is the objective of kind of where zakah applies here. That they don't have money hidden away in a pot. They just, if a person lives a minimalist life, a frugal life, that's one thing. And if you think they are deserving of zakah, you don't give zakah like that. You only give zakah when you are convinced of this person's situation. You've done a level of due diligence. And I don't mean that, you say, show me your bank accounts. But you, in essence, for example, you know that this person is in debt of £20,000. And there's no way he has that kind of money and he's trying to pay that back. So he's definitely in the negative. So that person you can give zakat to. So I would say, generally speaking, it's when you are very convinced. Like some people, they are in crazy debt, but they're living a 5-star lifestyle. Because they're not interested, they don't care about paying that debt back. Do you understand? So they are still technically eligible for zakah because their assets might be less, but you may choose not to give it to that person. Because that person, remember the underlying objective of zakah is to kind of get people back on their feet and to put them in a situation where they're not just day-to-day surviving kind of, paycheck to paycheck type of thing. So it's to assist them to kind of alleviate those debts. So if 1 month you gave zakah to somebody with debt, they don't have to worry about that debt payment that month, which means they have a little bit more to spend on the family or something like that. So there would be a level of due diligence required. And so that's why I'll give you examples of charities that sometimes won't do their due diligence. I have a friend who's been in Masjid al-Aqsa and he's been sat there at the time of iftar, and there's been date packages that he's received, and he's looked at the bottom of it and he says zakat, and it's been sent as zakat for Masjid al-Aqsa, and he's not a recipient of zakah, so he shouldn't be eating these dates, and somebody's just put these dates out. Unless they use the word zakah for sadaqah, which we have good hope in them for, but sometimes people overlap the language, etc. What I'm saying is zakah has its very specific recipients, right? And the recipients of zakah is generally somebody poor. Now again, when it comes to zakah, you do not have a say in what the person does with this wealth. If, for example, this person is poor and they have debts, and I say to them, here's zakah, I can't say it's for your debts. If they take this zakah and they spend it on a brand new car, they take it and go eat in a fancy restaurant, they can do whatever they want with that zakah. That's on them. You give property to that. I can't give zakah to the masjid because listen, you can give zakah to the masjid if the masjid is collecting to distribute the zakah to zakah eligible people. But to give zakah for the lights of the masjid and this and that, because nobody becomes the owner. And that doesn't mean don't give money to the masjid. You should be giving your sadaqah, your lillah, your charity stuff, etc. to the masjid where possible. But what I'm saying is zakah you have to give to the person and make them direct owner of either the wealth or some food or some necessity that they need. So you can buy food packs and you can give those food packs to somebody who's deserving of zakah, and that's the way the zakah will operate. But when you're looking at recipients of zakah, it's not a case of you just, you don't do your due diligence and you just say, well, this person looks, no, you have to do your kind of identification in that regard. I was saying there's a point which I lost on the recipients discussion. I mentioned about the dates in Masjid Al-Aqsa, and then I said, it'll come back to me inshallah. So, but the recipients of zakah, you need to identify whether if they have those. Yeah, so another example, you can't give, this is what I was going to say, you can't give zakah to build a well. Even if it's helping a community and this entire community is full of people who need zakah, you building a well doesn't make anybody owner of that well. That's sadaqah. Zakah has to be given in the ownership of somebody. You can do what you want with this wealth. Because you putting a well, there's a personal benefit for you there. You've kind of got your name on the well, or you've got this. When you give zakat to somebody, sadaqah you can do all that stuff with. Sadaqah you can say, I'd like to make a well, I'd like my name on it, I'd like to mention. Zakah, you do what you want with this money, you are deserving of it. Because that's the objective of zakah. It's not to create communal change as we see it. There's communal change you make with sadaqah and stuff. Zakah is fundamentally there to help individuals to lift them up, to help specific families to lift them up. Do you understand? Now, it is the responsibility of the person giving zakah to make sure that the person you're giving your zakah to discharges it in a legit way. If they don't discharge it properly, you are held accountable for that. So so that's why I keep saying due diligence. There are certain charities that do really good work. I'll give you an example. I mentioned this on Friday. Ummah Welfare Trust, I know very well specific. I don't get any commission, or I don't even have any communication with them. I know they do a very solid job. To the extent that I'll tell you, there is admin fees that go into charities. Admin fees are different to zakah. Admin fees, you can use it to pay the wages, to pay for marketing, all of that. Ummah Welfare Trust, at the end of each year, whatever admin fees they have left inside their accounts, they put it back into the charity. They don't need to do that. And they'll write on their, I've seen on their thingy, that we had 1 million something in our admin fees, we put it all back into the charity, into the main charity, towards this cause. So they and also zakah, for example, it needs to be discharged yearly. So you need to make sure that the person you're giving to fulfills it within that year. It's not to line this, zakah charities kind of pockets, just to say when something comes up, we'll spend it then. No, if it's zakah, you need to spend it within that year of receiving it. And otherwise, so you need to have that infrastructure on the ground as a charity, that if you're taking big amounts of charity, you need to make sure you're able to discharge these zakah. Sadaqah and lillah funds can stay, and then you can, when you find the best place, or if they're in, and also where people donate is important. If somebody says I'm donating for orphans and you don't send it to orphans, that charity is going to be held accountable. So these kind of things, if you're saying generally you give towards this cause, no problem. But if you've specified as a charity, we're going to give it. So the charities have a huge responsibility. And that's what I've seen from Ummah Welfare Trust. They'll give you a bunch of options. They have complete different accounts as well. That if you say I want to send it to this country for orphans, it will go there. If you say I want to send it to this country for this widows, it'll go there. And you can even choose the most needy option. And you can say, I want it to go to the most needy currently, according to you guys doing the work on the ground. You guys make that decision for me, and I want it in zakah, then they will give it to zakah. So make sure, like I don't trust my zakah with like just anybody and everybody. I'm very careful with my zakah. With sadaqah and other forms of charity, there is a level of leeway. You can just read it out. If there's a question. Does that answer the question?
Actually, it did to a certain extent. At the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned that there's a line of poverty that needs to be established. Is there any mizan or shari, a legal scale on how to establish that? I mean,
The nisab.
and this that means that anyone below that line eligible to receive?
So according to the Hanafi school, when it comes to receiving zakah, they say the nisab, let's say, is £5,000. Anybody who has below that is not automatically eligible for zakah. The calculation then you do is this: calculate all of you, other than your necessities in life, any wealth you own above your necessity, if that reaches £5,000, you can't take zakah. So I'll give you an example. I, for example, have a mobile. Scholars will now discuss, is a mobile a necessity or not? And majority of scholars say it's a necessity now. For generally a person working, a person this, that, the mobile has become a necessity. A laptop, it's used for work. Yes, I use it for gaming for 20%. I use it for maybe watching YouTube for 5%, etc., etc. But it's used for work as well. It's a necessity. I need it. Even if it's 1% used for work, it's a necessity. My car, it's a necessity. 2 cars, not a necessity anymore. Second car is not a necessity, third car. So add all of your non-necessity assets. Microwave, necessity. Fridge, necessity. Oven, necessity. Do you understand? These things we'll call a necessity, of course, without discussion. But for example, when it comes to plates and things like this, having the fancy plates and this many glasses and this much cutlery, that's now beyond the necessity. So for a person to receive zakah, it's not just you have to have less than the nisab. All of the non-necessity items that you own, if they equal to nisab, they are non-necessity. You can sell them and have nisab. So you, in that instance, cannot take zakah. Now, if again you add all of those things up, but you've got 20,000 in debts, so you're completely in the negative, so now this person can take zakah to fulfill those debts. Do you understand? So zakah can be taken to fulfill those debts. So it's the poverty line is the nisab. We're using the nisab for those who give zakah. We're using the nisab for those who are going to take zakah. But it's a slight different calculation. In zakah, if you're above it, you give, or equal to it, you give. But in receiving zakah, it's not if you're below it, you receive zakah. It's if you're below it and your non-necessary items of existence add up to less than that nisab, now you can take zakah. And so that's where now there in the Quran there's specific stipulations of people who can receive zakah, للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها, those, etc., etc. So Allah has specified this in the Quran. Scholars discuss, there is some level of disagreement even within these as well. For example, early Islam, they would actually give it to non-Muslims who were coming towards the faith, who were struggling because of getting kicked out of homes and things like this. So for the early Makkans, they would kind of give in these kind of instances as well. But there is some level of disagreement in that. But generally speaking, we don't really practically give it in those instances. For new Muslims, for example, generally they will have below that nisab anyway. If they've been kicked out of the home or something like that, they have below that amount and you can give them to support them. And I always say, let's not make new Muslims and things like this eligible for zakah. We should be giving from our sadaqah. We should be giving from optional. Forget zakah or not saying that, I only should give you this much because that's my zakah. You need this much, let me give it from my side, optional sadaqah. So these kind of things. So there is the kind of legal element of it and there is the ethical element of it, of course. So does that answer that? Inshallah. Go on. So that covers the recipients. Is yours connected to the recipients? Is your question connected to recipients? Okay, so we'll take this one and then.
Yeah, I'm going to just asking certain organizations are saying it is permissible to spend your money building, to spend your zakat on building a restaurant. Certain
which one?
Organizations are collecting.
Which organization?
The uncle just showed me this one.
They've given no reference or anything. They've given references for everything else. But you can't. It would still be wrong. The reason being is it's. I'll tell you something. As a charity, sometimes this is not the best thing to say, but I'm not going to say the name of the charity. But as a charity, sometimes your objective is to take money, even though your intent is to spend it in a good way. Your intent is to take money and say, we want to do things with this. But sometimes that responsibility of where that money is spent is forgotten. From the ahadith, it is very clear that ownership has to be made to the person you're giving zakat to.
I have another question.
Go on.
If we give zakat to an organization, then you fill up a form. Then you declare it in your tax return. And then you get some benefit tax benefit back. Do you count back what the taxable asset, what you get back from the tax? Here, take this first. So the question is, I think gifted, right? Yeah. Are we talking gifted or are we taking? No, I'm saying that you.
Oh, I understand.
When you fill up a tax return, you declare what donations you have given.
Yes. Okay.
You get some tax benefit for next year.
Yeah, and where's that tax benefit taken from?
From your income.
Yeah, so that's fine. Because so the question is, I've given zakah, I've given some charity or something like that, and I can request tax benefits. And what in essence the government says that if you give into charities, then we will give you money back. The charity will receive the 100% of the funds, but we will give you some money back from our side because what you're doing is a good thing. So when you give charity, we'll give you some returns on your tax. So if instead of taking £1,000 on tax, we'll give you a certain percentage or whatever amount back instead, so you don't have that. That's completely permissible. Why? The zakah has been given, the obligation has been fulfilled, and this is given as because of a scheme that exists. That's nothing to do with the zakah. So to receive that would be fine. You don't need to give zakah on that comes back until your next zakah anniversary. Do you understand? So on the next time, if you still have that money, you give it. If you don't have that money, you don't need to give it. Yes, sir?
Zakat money is given for food package or cash money. Which are the best?
The question is, which is best, food or cash? It depends on the circumstance. I'll give you an example. If there's a place that's undergone an earthquake, you give them cash, what are they going to do with this cash? Nothing, they've got nowhere to spend it. But you give them food, you give them supplies, that would be beneficial for them. So it's each circumstance, you look at the situation. If somebody's in debt and you fill their freezer with meat, you can technically give the zakah like that, but it's, do you understand? Exactly, context. So each person you will determine according.
You have needed money, so needed much is not giving you 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, but this is not enough, full debt money, so take for own self. So
I didn't understand that last bit. Say that again.
Someone needs for money.
Someone needs money.
Yeah. So they say it's better for giving cash money. So cash money only 2,000, 1,000, that's not enough, So you have to give him more. So
you can give any amount.
Any amount.
Zakah can be even if you give £1. Remember the objective.
Because this family is not maintained. So
but the
giving food for package.
Oh yes, I understand, 100%. Yeah. So you're saying that if you give the food package, it will be much more beneficial for them than the actual money. Yeah, so long as it's done in a legitimate way, etc. Yeah, no problem.
So basically the organizations and stuff like that who collect your zakah, and you make them the responsible of distributing your zakah. So they have the responsibility to spend that money within that year, or your ownership of giving zakah is fulfilled just by making them owners.
They have the responsibility of fulfilling it within that year.
So they have to do within that year.
Yeah. And
if they don't do that year, are you responsible or they're responsible?
So in essence, the scholars say that you are responsible of your zakah. If you make somebody the wakil, if you make somebody the agent on your behalf, you have selected this agent. I'll give you a very simple example. If I go into business, I will never select an agent who's going to do me over. I will vet this person, I will check this person, I will do my due diligence, because this is my money. So when it comes to Allah's money, I have to do the same due diligence. This is the money that's owed to Allah as such, and so I will do my due diligence and ensure that this person that I'm giving to is legitimate. Now, regarding fulfilling it within the year, some scholars have discussed that is a person sinful after the year, is a person not sinful after the year. Many scholars say once it's fulfilled, then the obligation is lifted. Does that make sense? So let's say it does take 2 or 3 years for them to distribute it, then you won't be held sinful after that, but before that you would be. So if it's fulfilled, you'll be forgiven for all of that, but it's a case of if it's not fulfilled, it's because now it's delayed zakah. I'll give you an example. If a person that hasn't paid zakah and they die, they're sinful. But if a family member now quickly pays that zakah for them after they passed away and they calculate it and they give that zakah, then that responsibility is waived from them. So as a safety precaution, it's best. But if a charity does, realistically they can't pay like all of the zakah that year, and they do have some funds left over, and then it's not an issue so long as you do ensure that that zakah is eventually fulfilled. So you've just got to make sure of that. Do you understand?
Sure. How do you vet an organization? Like in so many cases in the past, it happened in Syria and such, and in Yemen, that money that was sent through these organizations, they ended up in the hands of like those governments, like Bashar al-Assad's government, and nowadays Bashar al-Assad only takes care of his sect. And it happened so many times in the past, from money that was sent from Europe, from France, from Belgium, from here in England. So how do you actually go about investigating or even vetting such an organization if they send little or none?
Yeah, the question is, how do we realistically vet a charity, for example, and know that it's reaching the end kind of person? There isn't a single binary answer to this, and I can just say that these are the steps that you take. But what I say is this, I always start with this. Zakah, the obligation of zakah is very interesting in the sense that you have to give to the poor, and the Sharia talks about your left hand not knowing what your right hand has given. And this idea is you would be amongst the poor people. Part of zakah, it's not just money, it's actually a spiritual thing. It comes in a hadith that a person who passes their hand on the head of an orphan, that person's heart is softened. It comes in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad mentions this hadith where he mentions that 2 things will soften the heart, and one of them is you pass your hand over the head of an orphan. Can you imagine if there's an orphan here and we just all like line up and we queue up and we just touch the head and we all go and suddenly our hearts get soft? No, it doesn't work like that. The objective of the hadith is there is no way you're going to get close to an orphan and put your hand on their head unless they know you personally and you are a part of their life. The Sharia is saying become a part of the orphan's life. When you see an orphan, when you interact with an orphan, you should have a connection with this orphan, and you should spend time with this orphan, and you should give them support and assist them in a way that you become a part of their life. Imagine how spiritually that changes a person. And then you pass your hand on their head. That's how you soften your heart, because by spending time with an orphan and supporting them, you've seen the struggles they're going through. Similarly with zakah, the aspect of taking the cash out, that's one element of the nafs being kind of damaged. You're affecting the nafs and breaking it by saying you've earned this wealth but you're going to lose it. But there's another element of zakah where you go and find this recipient person, you know their circumstances, and it renders you so sad that you say you are deserving of my zakah. So the best case scenario is you give your zakah with your own hands. If you make somebody an agent and you're doing it through a website or through a company or through a charity, that onus of responsibility is on you. Now, how do you vet it? It's a difficult question to answer, because everything looks legitimate. Maybe there's probably videos and everything that the distribution is taking place. How do we know the distribution is taking place? It's if you know that there are good scholars involved in this charity and there are good individuals who are kind of focused on the the vetting process and this process and that process, and they're very transparent, they're very clear. Look, we had this many wages, this many fees, the person in our organization, and Ummah Welfare Trust have that. As a charity, they have to declare if anybody's earning more than 50,000 or something like that. If anybody's earning, they don't have a single person in their organization earning more than 50,000. And they make millions, and they could easily have kickbacks, and in their admin costs they have so much, but they give themselves as a charity, they work as a charity. They've got these things in place. They're not there to make money. They all have their own jobs. And I've read into some of the individuals in the organization. They have their own responsibilities. And actually, I have been to once with my teacher to the house of Maulana Muhammad Ummah Welfare. I've been to his house. It's in Bolton. It's probably the most simple house you'll come into. I don't mean simple. They sit on like on the floor kind of thing in his house. We went into the house and there's nothing on the walls. It's not even like this. Like, you know, back in the days you have like half wallpaper here and half wallpaper. It's that kind of a house. It's a very simple house. And that's the guy who's the head of Ummah Welfare Trust. So when I saw that kind of a lifestyle from the person who's the main guy, that was convincing enough for me. But again, listen, me saying Ummah Welfare Trust does not mean there's no other charity. There's so many fantastic charities doing phenomenal work. Give to whatever charity, if it's back home, if it's locally, if it's this, if it's that. Just do your due diligence as much as you can. And yes, there will come a point where you do your best and you leave the rest to Allah and say, Allah, you know, and Allah is shakur, Allah is appreciative of our efforts. It's not like, you know, it's one thing is if you say, give me your zakah, you give this. No, one thing is you did your best, you went on the website, you checked, you checked whatever you could, you did as much research as you could into it. You maybe asked them a few questions and, you know, zakah, etc. Do you properly fulfill the zakah, whatever. You asked the reference, somebody said, yeah, you know, I've seen the work that they do, I've been on the ground, for example. And then they're legitimate, you've seen the work that they're doing, etc. And you give it, and it turns out to be wrong, Allah inshallah will be forgiving. Allah is Kareem. Allah knows that you did your best, you tried your best, and you know you gave it to that place with a good intention. Your objective was to try and benefit people who are in a difficult situation, like Syria, for example, where funds are very difficult to get in, and you know it's just like, you know, even when the earthquake took place, like Turkey had very easy assistance and support, but somewhere like Syria, it's very difficult to get funds to them and support them. So these kind of things, if your intent is I want to help these people, then it's completely, you know, Allah inshallah will overlook. Just one last discussion before we conclude. It's just the deductibles. It will take no more than 3 minutes inshallah. You've got your list on this left hand side that I've keep mentioning about your zakatable assets. You've got your gold, your silver, your cash, your this, your pensions, your investments, whatever. You've made a list, you've added that up, that comes to 100,000 for example. On your other side, you need to calculate your debts. It's very simple. If you have a family debt or a friend debt, you can deduct the entire amount. What does that mean? If you've said to a family or friend that, look, I'm thinking of buying a house, can I borrow 10,000 from you, 15,000 from you, 5,000 from you, 20,000 from you, you've got a bunch of money. Family and friend debts, or what they call, there's a specific word for it, I can't remember what kind of debt it is. It's like, not a soft debt, but it's known as, let me quickly check. No, I can't remember. But it's a certain type of debt, which means you can deduct the entire amount. Why? They can ask for that money at any time. They can come on your door and say, you know, I need that money back. I need that money back now, and then you have to somehow find funds. You might have to take more debts out to pay back this debt because this person needs it. So because of that, you can deduct the entire amount of family and friends debt. That's out of the way. Any debts that are not family and friends, we're talking institutions, organizations, banks, for example, anything like this. Now remember, we're not talking banks, etc. Pause banks for a second. Islamic banks, etc. That kind of thing. Any debt that needs to be paid off within 12 months, an organization or some sort of a like formal debt, which is in a contract and this and that, you know, you can deduct that entire debt. So if you have to pay it back within the next 12 months, you can deduct that. If you have to pay back more than 12 months of debt, 24 months, 36 months, whatever amount, you can't deduct the entire amount. You can only deduct the next 12 months of payments. Because your zakah is from year to year. So whatever that year you have of debts, you can deduct that. The next year, you can deduct the next year's amount, or however much you're going to be in debts. So you can deduct 12 months worth of debts, long-term debts. Long-term debts. I think they call it short-term and long-term debts. So the family debts are short-term, they can take it off you at any point. Long-term debts, or it's fixed, they will never ask for you in advance. You will just continue paying these installments. If it's a long-term debt, then you can deduct the next 12 months. I'm talking debts, remember. I'm not talking about bills. Future expenses, bills that are not yet due. Next month's rent, next month's bills, I can't take that off. That's not a debt. That will only, if I die today, I don't need to pay the next month's rent. Do you understand? I only need to pay the next month's bills and rents, but not the next, so I only need to pay the debts, not the bills and the rent. Do you understand? So I can take, and any overdue payments, any payments that I should have paid but I have not been able to pay. For example, say I have a phone contract and last month I was not able to pay for my phone contract and now I need to pay £50, I'm falling behind, that I can deduct. So overdue payment, because that's like a debt, that's basically a debt. So, arrears as well, for those of you who know, arrears is basically similar to overdue payments. So arrears or overdue payments you can deduct. You can't deduct anything that's not payable in the next 12 months. I'll give you an example. If I have a student loan of £50,000, somebody will say £50,000 is a lot of debt, deduct it. But I'm not paying a penny of it back yet. With student loans, the rule is when you earn a certain amount, then you will start paying fractional amounts of that debt back. So once I earn, for example, £30,000, I will start paying back a certain amount. If I earn £40,000, I pay, as an example. So if I'm right now not earning that amount, even though it's a debt on me, but I'm not paying it right now. All the simple calculation, in the next 12 months, how much am I paying back? If I'm not paying anything back, I don't take it. If I am paying back, I am allowed to deduct a certain amount, but listen to this carefully. I cannot deduct unlawful payments. Any interest-based debts, any interest-based payments, I can't deduct that. If you have a student loan, there are two elements to the student loan. There is the capital, the original 50,000 that you went into. That's completely permissible. To borrow 50,000 is permissible. But the additional now, the interest payments that have accrued on that, that's impermissible. That's still a debt that you owe, but it's impermissible. So you can deduct the 50,000 if it's paid back in the 12 months. So listen carefully. I'm going to give you a very simple scenario that will explain all of these rules in one scenario. I took a student loan out, £50,000. I am earning money, which means I need to pay back £10,000 every year. The student loan was 50,000. Really, hang on to this example, you'll understand this. £50,000 student loan, I am paying back £10,000. Currently, I'm earning so much that I'm paying back £10,000 a year. 50,000 was a student loan. On top of that, 10,000 had become interest. So 60,000 I need to pay back. Year one, in the next 12 months, I need to pay back £10,000. I can deduct it because it's from the capital, the 50,000, the original. Second year, I can deduct the next 10,000. Third year, the next 10,000. Fourth year, the next 10,000. Fifth year, I can deduct this every. When I come to the fifth year, 50,000 of the capital payment has been paid back. And I can deduct that because it's the capital payment. In year 6, now it's the interest payments that I'm paying back. I can't deduct interest payments. So that 10,000 which is interest payments, I can't deduct that. So it's as simple as that. So just follow it like that. Capital payments you can take away, and then when it comes to the interest payment, you know exactly how much was the capital, how much was the interest. You can't deduct interest payments. Do you understand? So scholars will mention this regarding mortgages, scholars will mention this regarding everything as well. If you have a mortgage, you know what the capital payment was, let's say £250,000. You can each year for the next 12 months, what you need to pay, deduct that amount, but as soon as you hit the interest amount, you can't deduct that. So mortgages are the same, student loans are the same, all of these things are the same, but you can't deduct the haram amount. It's as simple as this, that the Sharia does not permit it, so you cannot do it. Now, with the deductibles done, it's simple. Add up everything in the column of your gold, silver, cash, investments, business stock, whatever it is. Add up all of your debts, your liabilities, your this, whatever you have in the next 12 months, and whatever family debts you have, add it all up. And if after this calculation of your debts and your assets, you will basically do, if let's say you own £100,000 and your debts are £50,000, you'll do 100,000 minus 50,000. That is your zakatable, net zakatable assets. That's your net zakatable assets. Yeah, so in our instance it's 50,000. All you do once you've calculated that is just check the nisab. Let's say the nisab is 6,000. If I have more than that or equal to, I need to give zakah on this 50,000. If I don't have that amount, I don't need to give. Now some people say nisab is 5,000. So if I do I need to give it on that 5,000 of the, forget all. Everything that I have in this figure, I need to give 2.5% of that. So if you put that number into your calculator and do times by 0.025, that will give you 1/40th or 2.5%. So if you put into your calculator £10,000 multiplied by 0.025, 0.025, that will give you the zakah sum that you need. That's zakat done. That's zakat done. You don't need to give that money straight away. You can leave that money in your bank, and as it goes along throughout the rest of the year, you can decide, I'm going to give £10 here today, I'm going to give £10 there today, I'm going to give £50 there today, I'm going to give £100 there today. Depending on how you want to spread that out, you can spread that zakah out. You understand? You can give any amount. You can give 1p, you can give £10, you can give £50, however much you want. You can even give £10,000 to one person in zakah, even though that £10,000 will bring this person to having and more than nisab and giving, doesn't matter. You can choose where you spend that. You can choose where you spend that. The objective is you have to fulfill it to somebody who is eligible for it. That's it. That's all zakah covered. Any questions?